Cryptid is defined as any creature which has not been recognized by science. People across all eras from all walks of life report seeing creatures that they can't explain. Several animals such as the giant squid, gorilla, kangaroo, and platypus were once thought to be figments of the imagination, but are now known to exist. How many other cryptids are more real than we'd like to believe? For each cryptid, I will give all the relevant details, including legends and witness accounts for all that I can. I've got to thank Redditor Jimbo Seth for creating this iceberg. You can find his original post in the description, along with all of my sources, most of them archived. I urge you to do your own research and always think for yourself. Thank you for watching. Bigfoot. Almost every culture worldwide has stories of unexplained bipedal great apes which roam the wilderness. Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, is commonly described as a 6 to 9 feet tall, ape-like humanoid. Most Bigfoot sightings are concentrated within the American Northwest, a region of vast, untamed, and untouched forests, which is one of the few places a large mammal could perhaps evade us. The most famous piece of evidence for Sasquatch's existence is the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film. This footage you're seeing now is said to depict a female Bigfoot. Other pieces of evidence for Bigfoot's existence include photos, casts of abnormally large footprints, and audio recordings of guttural, unknown animal-like screams. Although most encounters with this creature describe Bigfoot as being peaceful, shy, and wary of humans, this is not always the case. In the summer of 1924, 5 prospectors by the names of Marion Smith, his son Roy Smith, Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson were working 2 miles east of Mount St. Helens, Washington, near a deep canyon, when they came across a set of footprints reportedly very human-like, but much larger, and with unusually stubby toes. The men allegedly began hearing strange sounds, and not long after this, they became aware of the fact that they were being stalked by a large, ape-like figure. They referred to this creature as the Mountain Devil. The Mountain Devil was staring at them from behind a large pine tree next to a ravine. It was said to be very dark brown in color, and they estimated it to be about 7 feet tall. It ducked behind the tree and then poked its head out to watch them again. Later that night, as the men settled into their cabin, they came under attack by an unknown number of mountain devils. Though the men only saw 3 creatures at a time, they suspected there were many more. They began throwing large rocks at the cabin, and in turn, the men took cover and began firing their rifles back at the creatures. At one point, the men suspected that the creatures had gotten onto the roof of their cabin and were stomping and striking it. This standoff lasted until the morning, and as soon as things quieted down, the men reluctantly left their log cabin. One of the creatures was waiting for the men, watching from atop the cliff. Beck raised his rifle and fired at the creature 3 times. The mountain devil staggered backwards and plummeted 400 feet to its supposed death. This region came to be known as Ape Canyon, named after this event, the Battle of Ape Canyon. In 1975, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers published the Washington Atlas. They spent over $200,000 on it. Adjusting for inflation, this would be $1 million as of today. The atlas cataloged all species, habitats, and ecological systems in Washington for use by both government agencies and the public. This atlas actually includes Sasquatch, and documents nearly 500 Sasquatch sightings and footprints discovered in Washington state before and after 1968. The document states that the FBI even analyzed hair from an alleged Sasquatch, and that the DNA did not belong to any known human or animal. Quote, "No such hair exists on any human or presently known animal for which such data is available." End quote. Under a Freedom of Information Act request, the FBI did release a file on Sasquatch. However, the DNA test referenced by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was not included. The test results referenced in the 1975 Washington Atlas have yet to be discovered, and the FBI claims to have misplaced them or found no reference to them at all. Inside the FBI's Sasquatch file, there was a different hair sample test which turned out to be from a deer. However, again, this was not the sample the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers referenced. Could the FBI be hiding the holy grail of Sasquatch evidence? Environmental DNA, or eDNA, is a relatively new technology that allows scientists to take samples from a given area, and then they test these samples for DNA left behind by organisms living in the area, things like skin cells, waste, hair, etc. A recent eDNA study took samples from a wide area, from the state of Kentucky to Washington state. Miroslava Ramos, project manager at the UCLA California Environmental DNA Program, has analyzed the eDNA samples and stated, quote, "What I found very interesting was that, yes, we have detected human DNA in these areas, but we're still seeing different primate DNA. There wasn't just one human primate, there were several different primates, some sort of primate relative that exists in the data. Pan troglodyte is a species of chimpanzee, which you would not see in the areas that you're at. It's a real head-scratcher. It's important to note that the higher the detection, the more confidence we can say that whatever organism, whatever taxonomy we're looking at, was apparent in the area. In this case, we're looking at the pan genus, or the chimpanzee genus. There are 3,000 reads." End quote. There is much debate over what exactly Bigfoot is. Some believe Bigfoot to be a missing link between man and ape, or an undiscovered and undetected subspecies of Homo sapien, similar to Neanderthals and Denisovans. Believers point to the fact that there are many documented cases of other primates, such as chimpanzees, quickly realizing when they are being observed by humans, and they actively obscure themselves from us and even video cameras. They say that given Bigfoot's hulking size, he should have a much larger or denser brain than any other primate, and should be able to do so as well, to an even greater degree. Even chimps can show a level of problem solving that we humans seem to have lost, likely replacing it with the ability to manipulate complex machines, navigate overcomplicated social structures, and patience to withstand tedious manual labor. Others believe that the only reason Bigfoot can evade capture and leave little to no evidence or obvious signs of his existence behind is because Bigfoot is not a flesh and blood ape, but a creature not of this earth at all. These theories range from Bigfoot being an extraterrestrial or an interdimensional being. Fred Beck, who witnessed the Battle of Ape Canyon, believes that Bigfoot is a lower dimensional being, which phases into our dimension in an attempt to transcend to a higher plane of consciousness. Those who adhere to this theory cite the number of Bigfoot accounts which involve elements of high strangeness, with multiple unexplained or paranormal happenings coinciding with Sasquatch sightings, such as UFO and alien encounters. Another common aspect to this belief is that Bigfoot himself possesses supernatural powers and abilities, including, but not limited to, invisibility, teleportation, levitation, and in some cases the outright ability to shift between dimensions. I could do an entire iceberg on Sasquatch alone. If you're interested at all in Bigfoot, I recommend that you check out Bob Gimlin's channel. I'll leave a link in the description. Gigantic octopus. There are many ancient legends of the gigantic octopus, creatures such as the Norse kraken, which was said to lurk in the oceans off the coast of Norway and Greenland, and is large enough to drag entire ships under the sea. The ancient Nordic Orvar Odr saga contains one of the first references to the kraken. While seeking vengeance against Augmund Tusok for the murder of his blood brother Thord, Odr sets out to sail across the sea. During his voyage, Odr and his companions encounter two large sea creatures. Quote, "These were two sea monsters, one called Sea Reek and the other Heatherback. The Sea Reek is the biggest monster in the whole ocean. It swallows men and ships and whales too, and anything else around. It stays underwater for days. Then it puts up its mouth and nostrils, and when it does, it never stays on the surface for less than one tide." End quote. The giant Pacific octopus is the largest scientifically recognized octopus. It can be found in the northern Pacific Ocean, off the coast of the United States, up to Alaska and around Japan. The largest individual on record weighed 600 pounds and measured 30 feet across in length. On average, though, they weigh closer to 110 pounds and measure 16 feet across. The giant Pacific octopus is extremely intelligent and has been observed opening jars and mimicking other species. Though this one isn't on the iceberg, I'm adding it because it's probably scarier than any monster, really. The big fin squid, or Magna Pena squid, is one of the most rarely encountered squids. The clip you're seeing now was filmed above the seafloor of the Gulf of Mexico on November 11, 2007. More specifically, Perdido, a shell oil drilling site 200 miles off of Houston. The creature wouldn't have been spotted if not for the fact that Perdido is one of the world's deepest oil sites. According to Lance Medlin, who worked at Shell Perdido, quote, "I was on this project, Shell Perdido Spar. Trust me, it's real. It was a big deal when we caught it on camera. Before this, it was believed that they only got to 3,000 feet deep and only grew 30 feet. This one is nearly 8,000 feet down and about 150 long." End quote. Giant squid and other cephalopods have 8 short arms and 2 long tentacles. Magna Pena has 10 indistinguishable appendages that all appear to be the same length, which even have elbows. Though we've never witnessed the creature feed, scientists believe that it captures prey by dragging its long tentacles across the ocean floor until a poor soul is unfortunate enough to run into it. The squid then uses its tentacles to ensnare its prey, like a murderous puppet master, to drag its prey across the ocean floor to kill it and then devour it. Sea serpents. One of the most common types of cryptids reported throughout time are sea monsters or sea serpents. Most of these creatures are described as snake or dragon-like and can often be dangerous for humans to encounter, the most famous of which is the next entry on the iceberg, Nessie. For centuries, there have been accounts of a monster lurking in the loch, which has come to be known as the Loch Ness Monster, or Nessie, our underwater ally. The oldest account of a monster commonly thought of as Nessie comes from the biography of Saint Columba, written in the late 7th century. According to the biography, in 565 AD, Saint Columba encountered a group of men bearing a man who had been killed by an aquatic monster in the river Ness. Columba then used one of the men as bait and used magic prayers to banish the creature into the depths of the loch. It's also important to note that St. Columba's biography is full of whimsical and exaggerated stories like this one. There are many Scottish legends of water spirits known as kelpies, which inhabit the waters of Scotland. A study of pre-1933 Highland folklore analyzed references to kelpies, water horses, water bulls, and other aquatic spirits, and found that Loch Ness was most commonly said to be the home of these creatures, more so than any other body of water in Scotland. In 1933, a new road was completed along Loch Ness's shore, which, for the first time, would give drivers a clear view of the loch while they were driving. On July 22nd of the same year, George Spicer and his wife were driving on this road next to the loch when they witnessed a large, undulating, blob-like creature that covered the entire road. Described as a huge snail with a long neck or tail, fin-like appendages, no discernible head, and leathery, gray skin like that of a rhinoceros. According to George Spicer, it was, quote, "the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life," end quote. In January 1934, a doctor named Robert Kenneth Wilson noticed something moving in Loch Ness and stopped his car to take this photo, which has come to be known as the surgeon's photo because Wilson refused to have his name associated with it. This is the first sighting of the familiar plesiosaur-like Nessie. This monster was actually a plastic and wooden head attached to a toy submarine. Though this famous photograph is an admitted hoax, there are a few other things that believers point to as evidence of something unknown living within Loch Ness. In 1955, Peter McNabb captured 2 photos of a large object in the loch. These black and white photos, with Urquhart Castle in frame, are really gothic and make a really cool background if nothing else. McNabb's account of that day is taken from Nicholas Witchell's Loch Ness Story, published in 1974. Quote, I was returning from a holiday in the north with my son, and pulled the car up on the road just above Urquhart Castle. It was a calm, warm, hazy afternoon. I was all ready to take a shot of Urquhart Castle when my attention was held by a movement in the calm water over to the left. Naturally, I thought of the monster, and hurriedly changed over the standard lens of my Exacta camera to a 6-inch telephoto. As I was doing so, a quick glance showed that some black or dark, enormous water creature was cruising on the surface. Without a tripod and in a great hurry, I took the shot. I also took a very quick shot with another camera, a fixed focus Kodak, before the creature submerged again." End quote. In 1987, Operation Deep Scan took place, led by Nessie hunter and marine biologist Adrian Shine, in partnership with Daryl Lawrence, head of Lawrence Electronics, who provided sonar units with a range of 1,300 feet, which could detect objects as small as 1 foot in length and separate objects which were only 1 inch apart. The operation costed 1 million euros, or nearly 1.4 million US dollars today. Over 20 boats with echo sounder technology allowed the boats to use sound waves to map out the loch for 2 whole days. The media at the time reported findings of Operation Deep Scan as proving the non-existence or perhaps extinction of Nessie. But on the first day, 3 strong sonar contacts were recorded from 78 meters to 180 meters. The best of these was made opposite of Urquhart Bay. The object entered the sonar at 174 meters and was tracked for 140 seconds. David Steensland of Lawrence Electronics stated that the 78-meter target might be of a very large known fish, but thought that unlikely at that depth. Of the other 2 targets, Steensland said that they were very strange and larger than those he picked up from sharks off the coast of Florida. Daryl Lawrence said that all the contacts were larger than a shark but smaller than a whale. After examining the echogram data, specifically the sonar return revealing a large moving object near Urquhart Bay, Lawrence said, "There's something here that we don't understand. There's something here that's larger than a fish, maybe some species that hasn't been detected before. I don't know." End quote. What you're seeing here is footage from a 1992 documentary called Secrets of the Loch. A slowed down portion of the original video appears to show an animate object larger than a seal or otter in the loch. The link to the original footage can be found in the description at 14 minutes and 40 seconds. October 5th, 2020. Sonar data was captured by Cruise Loch Ness director Ronald McKenzie, seeming to depict a large animate object moving under the water. The 49-year-old said, quote, "It was a bit of a dreek day, and we only had 12 passengers. We were at our halfway point off Ivor Morriston, where we turn around. The water's 189 meters deep here. It was right in the middle of the loch, at about 170 meters down. It was big, at least 10 meters. The contact lasted 10 seconds while we passed over." End quote. According to the official Loch Ness Monster sighting registry, there have been at minimum 5 sightings of Nessie in 2021 alone. So, what have people been seeing in the loch? The dominant theory about the Loch Ness Monster is that Nessie is some sort of plesiosaur, or some other type of surviving dinosaur that still remains in the loch to this day. In 2019, University of Otago's Professor Gemmell, who is a geneticist, conducted an eDNA study in Loch Ness specifically to search for Nessie. If any unidentified DNA was found, it would stand out and could then be compared to what plesiosaur DNA would have looked like. This study found an abnormally high amount of eel DNA in Loch Ness. Professor Gemmell is quoted as saying, "There is a very significant amount of eel DNA. Eels are very plentiful in Loch Ness, with eel DNA found at pretty much every location sampled. There are a lot of them. So, are they giant eels? Well, our data doesn't reveal their size, but the sheer quantity of the material says that we can't discount the possibility that there may be giant eels in Loch Ness. Therefore, we can't discount the possibility that what people see and believe is the Loch Ness Monster might be a giant eel. The university's hypothesis is that a 12-foot-long Loch Ness eel could exist, which would be double the size of the largest European eel. Are there any other accounts of large eels in Loch Ness? June 10th, 1856. An account of a giant eel was printed in the Inverness Courier. The sighting took place in the small town of Lorbost. Quote, "The village of Lorbost is at present the scene of an unusual occurrence. This is no less than the appearance of one of the inland freshwater lakes of an animal which, from its great size and dimensions, has not a little puzzled our island naturalists. Some suppose him to be the description of the hitherto mythological water kelpie, while others refer to it the minute descriptions of the sea serpent, which are revived from time to time in newspaper columns. It has been repeatedly seen within the last fortnight by crowds of people, many of whom have come forward from the remotest parts of the parish to witness the uncommon spectacle. The animal is described by some as being in appearance and size like a huge peat stack, while others affirm that a 6-oared boat could pass between the huge fins, which are occasionally visible. All, however, agree in describing its form as that of the eel, and we have heard one, whose evidence we can rely upon, state that in length he supposed it to be about 40 feet. It is probable that it is no more than a conger eel, after all, animals of this description having been caught in the Highland lakes, which have attained a huge size." End quote. So, is it possible that the Loch Ness Monster sightings have been mistaken groups of eels swimming near to the surface, creating the illusion of a serpent? Could there be a giant Loch Ness eel that's to blame for the sea serpent sightings? Or is something dark and ancient still lurking somewhere in the loch? Ogopogo. Although commonly described as Canada's Loch Ness Monster, the Ogopogo has a much longer history. The natives which lived near Lake Okanagan called the lake monster Nuhatik, which means sacred spirit of the water. They believed that the monster lived near Rattlesnake Island, which is within the lake. For hundreds of years, they would also sacrifice animals to Ogopogo before entering the lake. Nuhatik was often described as using its tail to create fierce storms to drown victims. According to native legends, a visiting chief, Timbasket, denied Ogopogo's existence and refused to make a sacrifice in exchange for permission from the spirit to cross the lake. Upon entering the lake on a canoe with his family, Nuhatik, quote, whipped up the surface of the lake with his long tail, end quote, and the canoe and its occupants were sucked to the bottom of the lake. In 1872, Susan Allison, who was the first European to settle near Lake Okanagan, was also the first European to witness Ogopogo, describing it as a large snake-like monster. Susan Allison had good relations with the natives and brought up her experience to the First Nations people, who then told her their legends of Nuhatik. In 1926, there was an alleged mass sighting of Ogopogo, wherein at least 30 people saw the monster from their cars while on the beach of Lake Okanagan. There have been numerous sightings since then, with the best resource for these sightings being a website called Ogopogo Quest. The two following accounts are from Ogopogo Quest. September 7th, 2006, Michelle and Gilles Bellevue from West Bank took this photo of a form just below the water, south of the Kelowna Mission area, on the east side of Okanagan Lake. The photo was taken from their boat at 2:30 p.m. They estimated the object to be about 25 feet long and approximately 50 feet from their boat. May 24th, 2015. Bill Stysek captured a few photos of the alleged monster from 200 meters away. Zooming in, we can almost make out a face. According to his account, quote, the object stayed in the same spot for almost a full minute, rotating its head as if looking around, at the end of which time it jumped out of the water, displaying its head and a portion of its neck before diving and disappearing beneath the water. End quote. In 2016, a strange figure was captured in Lake Okanagan on Google Earth. This figure is seen just next to Rattlesnake Island, where the First Nations tribes said the monster called home. Could this just be a coincidence? The Chupacabra is a cryptid which is primarily sighted in the Americas and preys upon livestock and drains its victims of all blood, leaving them completely exsanguinated. The Chupacabra is now commonly understood to be a canine, which appears to suffer from extreme mange. The video you're seeing now is police dashcam footage of an alleged Chupacabra captured in 2008. In Hood County, Texas, in July 2010, animal control officers cornered and killed an alleged Chupacabra. Texas A&M University scientists conducted tests on it and found it to be a coyote-dog hybrid, suffering from extreme mange and internal parasites. Mange is a contagious skin disease caused by parasitic mites seen primarily in domesticated animals. This explains some sightings, but neither coyotes or dogs have the ability to suck the blood of their prey, and the original sightings of a far more alien creature from Puerto Rico are still entirely unexplained. Most believe the Chupacabra was first seen in 1995, but the legend of this creature truly began 2 decades earlier, February 25, 1975, when a Puerto Rican newspaper first reported the strange animal deaths in the small town of Moca. In Moca's Barrio Roca, 15 cows, 3 goats, 2 geese, and a pig were found with puncture marks on their bodies and allegedly exsanguinated. Some locals feared that this was the work of a satanic cult. Newspapers gave the suspect a name, the Vampire of Moca. Despite these anomalous killings, the local police dismissed it all, attributing the livestock murders to dog attacks. The 2 main issues with this conclusion are, 1. Feral packs of dogs have existed in Puerto Rico for a very long time, and locals will be familiar with dog attacks, and this would be no different. The locals would not find this bizarre. The second issue is that Puerto Rico has no large native predators which could be capable of this. There was a lot of speculation as to the true nature of this creature. Many believed it was a supernatural bird, like the one seen by Mara Acevedo, a Moca resident who noticed that a strange animal had gotten onto her roof in the dead of night. According to her testimony, the animal pecked at the rusty rooftop and windows before taking flight, releasing a terrifying scream. These sightings coincide with high strangeness again, as some locals reported witnessing UFOs and strange lights in the sky. March 12, 1975. A man named Luis Torres and his children witnessed something they described as looking like the lights on a police cruiser spinning in the night sky on the outskirts of Moca. Torres connected this UFO sighting with the Moca vampire by stating that the object had been flying over fields in which some of the strangely killed animals had been found. And so, theories shifted to the idea of the vampire being an alien. By March 15th, when a farmer lost 34 chickens to the Moca vampire during the night, the animal death count was up to 90 victims in only a 2-week period since it first manifested. It was around this time that Luis Torres, the same farmer who witnessed the UFO, encountered 2 gigantic Puerto Rican boas, which were both 6 feet long. Luis slayed the 2 beasts, and the locals rejoiced, and the press declared that the vampire riddle had been solved. However, Dr. Juan Rivero, a herpetologist, stated that the Puerto Rican boa, a non-poisonous reptile, was actually physically incapable of killing animals as large as a goat, much less a cow. He added that these snakes' mouths were not actually adapted to suck blood either. To further this, on March 18th, the killings continued, putting the killer snake theory in the grave along with it. By April, reports of strange animal deaths started to turn up on farms all across the island of Puerto Rico, even as the police failed to find human perpetrators and the press failed to find rational explanations. July 31st, 1975, a newspaper article detailed the final attack of the Moca vampire. The following is what I was able to glean from a rough translation of the article. At Samuel Muniz's farm, a short distance from another farm from which the vampire claimed 4 victims and attacked a woman, the vampire struck again. Muniz's dog, a German shepherd named Joggy, heard the frightened howls of goats and began wildly barking and pulling on his chain, eventually breaking free and charging to their rescue. Joggy heroically arrived before the vampire could finish off one of the goats, rushing at the creature. A neighbor went out to investigate what was happening and witnessed the strange animal seemingly flapping its wings or spines and emitting a piercing shriek penetrating nearby mountains. By August, the vampire mysteriously vanished, its bloodlust quenched for 20 years. March 1995. 8 sheep were found killed and exsanguinated. As history repeats itself, the locals feared that this was the work of a satanic cult, and the police again dismissed these attacks, this time chalking it up to foxes. The first actual sighting of the Chupacabra was by Madeline Tolentino. With the help of a sketch artist, Madeline was able to better illustrate this monster. The Chupacabra was 4 to 5 feet tall. Its body was covered in fine gray fur, peppered with dark spots. The creature had large red eyes that were damp and protruding, running up to its temples and spreading to the sides, small holes for nostrils, a lipless mouth, and no visible ears. The creature's arms were thin, with 3 clawed fingers. It stood on 2 muscular legs, which were not unlike a kangaroo's, with sharp talons on its feet. Perhaps most strikingly, running from the vampire's head down its back were bright, phosphorescent spines, which constantly changed color. Though the government's analysis of 300 alleged Chupacabra victims dismissed claims of exsanguination and blamed dogs for the killings, a private veterinarian organization was not so sure of this. Doctor of Veterinary Medicine Angel Santana said that these killings could only have been caused by a human who he theorized to be part of a religious sect, or possibly another animal. Through the end of 1995, Chupacabras had been blamed for more than 1,000 mysterious animal deaths, all resulting from blood loss through 1 or more puncture wounds. Investigators following the trail of the Chupacabras in 1995, both in Puerto Rico and Central America, reportedly found considerably high radiation readings at the locations in which the entity staged its attacks. To me, this lends more credibility to the alien hypothesis. However, this led paranormal researcher John Keel to hypothesize that these creatures themselves could be made of, quote, highly condensed atoms, such as those in plutonium, end quote. Keel goes on to theorize that if dense, probably radioactive atoms account for the creature's composition, it would explain why these manifestations have such brief, transient existences in our material world. When first materialized, Keel suggests, these creatures pose no threat to humans, but as their atomic integrity deteriorates, they might easily project lethal radiation before fading away entirely. Are you ready for the strangest of all Chupacabra encounters? According to paranormal researcher Nick Redfern, there are no less than 11 documented sightings of Chupacabra wherein the monster becomes surrounded in a column of light before emerging as a wholly different monster, a large, hairy bipedal ape not unlike Sasquatch. Following these events, in the deserts of Mexico and the southwestern United States, a similar creature was spotted and given the same name. However, the name Chupacabra became very meaningless, in that anything strange, any strange animal, was simply called Chupacabra. In one case, even a strange-looking fish was called Chupacabra. In France, 2020, a mysterious outbreak of mutilated horses began. These horses have been devoured and mutilated in the same way as the Chupacabra's victims. So, is the Chupacabra a canine, a reptile, a bird, a shapeshifter? Is it even from this earth? The sightings of this creature vary widely, although all accounts share one crucial element, a monster with a thirst for blood. In the early 1700s, the Leeds family lived in the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey. Deborah Leeds, otherwise known as Mother Leeds, had given birth to 12 children and was simply exhausted with pregnancy. Upon becoming impregnated with her 13th child, in a moment of anger and frustration, she is said to have cursed her child, saying, quote, "Let it be the devil." Though in other versions, Mother Leeds' husband practiced the occult, and Deborah herself was a witch who was impregnated by the devil himself, Lucifer. Born as a normal human child, the 13th transformed into a monster. Its hands became claws, its legs became hooves. Once fully transformed, the 13th child possessed the head of a goat, bat wings, and a forked tail, becoming the Leeds Devil, better known as the Jersey Devil. Growling and screaming, the child beat everyone with its tail before flying up the chimney and disappearing into the pines. Some people have hypothesized that the entire legend of the Jersey Devil was fabricated by Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin's rival in the almanac business was Daniel Leeds, husband of Deborah Leeds. In 1687, Mr. Leeds was ostracized by the local community of the Pine Barrens, who were primarily Quakers, for publishing occult works and almanacs that contained astrology, angelology, mysticism, nature magic, and demonology. All of these topics were considered verboten by the Quakers, who began to not only censor Daniel Leeds' almanacs, but also destroyed them for being too pagan and blasphemous. Leeds even apologized initially, but doubled down after the order to destroy all copies of his almanac was issued. Leeds was also a supporter of the British monarchy, who were not very popular at the time if you're at all familiar with the American Revolution, which only furthered the locals' distaste for the Leeds family. Daniel Leeds' son, Titan Leeds, inherited both his father's almanac business and his rivalry with Benjamin Franklin, competing with Benjamin Franklin's popular Poor Richard's Almanac. In 1733, the competition between the two men intensified when Franklin used astrology in his almanac to predict Titan Leeds' death on October of the same year as a joke. Though Franklin's prediction was intended as a joke, Titan Leeds did not find it funny and was offended at the death prediction. Titan Leeds publicly called Franklin a fool and a liar. In a published response, Franklin mocked Titan Leeds' anger and joked that in fact, Titan Leeds had died on the date of the earlier prediction and was writing his almanacs as a ghost to haunt and torment Franklin. Franklin continued to mock Titan Leeds and call him a ghost even after Titan Leeds' actual death during 1738. The reputation of the Leeds family as both pagan occultists and supporters of the British Crown, in tandem with the Leeds' rivalry with Benjamin Franklin and Franklin's meme of Titan Leeds as a ghost, could have contributed to the legends of the Leeds Devil. In addition to this, the Leeds family crest depicts a dragon-like creature. If the sightings truly ended here, this will be a tidy explanation, right? In 1817, Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, moved to New Jersey, United States. Only 3 years later, he too would come face to face with the devil. Quote, Joseph Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon, was the King of Spain. Unsuccessful in defending Spain against England during the Peninsular Wars, he was forced to abdicate his throne in 1813. Following his brother Napoleon's defeat, Joseph went into exile in America, where he purchased 800 acres at Bordentown, New Jersey, because it was between the two great seaports of New York and Philadelphia. This allowed him to obtain the very latest news from both France and Spain. One snowy afternoon, the ex-king of Spain was hunting alone in the woods near his house when he spotted some strange tracks on the ground. They looked like the tracks of a two-footed donkey. Bonaparte noticed that one foot was slightly larger than the other. The tracks ended abruptly, as if the creature had flown away. He stared at the tracks for a long moment, trying to figure out what the strange animal might be. At that moment, Bonaparte heard a strange hissing noise. Turning, he found himself face to face with a large, winged creature with a horse-like head and bird-like legs. Astonished and frightened, he froze and stared at the beast, forgetting that he was carrying a rifle. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the creature hissed at him, beat its wings, and flew away. 20 years later, January 16th through the 23rd of 1909, newspapers published hundreds of claimed encounters with the Jersey Devil from all over the state. Among alleged encounters that week were claims the creature attacked a trolley car in Haddon Heights and a social club in Camden. The police in Camden and Bristol, Pennsylvania, reported to these sightings and fired on the creature, to no effect. A large cash reward of $10,000 was offered for the creature's capture. This search for the monster amounted to nothing but hilarious hoax attempts to get the prize money. One man was desperate enough to glue fake wings and claws onto a kangaroo in an attempt to pass it off as the Jersey Devil. In 1937, Sidney Ladley, his wife, and their neighbor, Chester Smith, encountered the Jersey Devil shortly after 9 p.m. As the Ladleys were driving home, the creature leaped over their car on a back road near their home. Sidney stated, quote, "It was about the size of a kangaroo and was covered with hair 4 inches long, and it hopped like a kangaroo. And eyes. What eyes?" Following this sighting, more than 20 neighboring farmers had taken their shotguns and unleashed their hounds and spent all night hunting for the monster. However, the men were unable to track it down. The Blue Hole is located deep in the Pine Barrens of Winslow, on the border of Camden, Gloucester counties. This pool is said to not only be bottomless, but also a frequent pit stop of the Jersey Devil. The surface of the Blue Hole is as still as glass and remains at a chilly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Although the water was crystal clear, there are no signs of life in the hole whatsoever. No fish, no insects, nothing. There is something unsettling about this void, making it easy to imagine why people might warn their children not to venture into these waters. According to unconfirmed reports, several people may have drowned or otherwise died in this lake for unknown reasons. The Jersey Devil is blamed for their murder. Suspecting this lake to be a favorite lurking place of the creature, locals used to set traps for it. As for another mysterious quality, some say that the bottom of the Blue Hole is an entrance to another dimension, which the Jersey Devil uses to go to and from our universe. The jackalope is reported to be a jackrabbit the size of a deer, with large antlers. This cryptid is at first glance a complete hoax, used to sell fake taxidermied rabbits with antlers in the days of the Wild West. However, this cryptid may be based on rabbits infected with Shope papillomavirus, which causes horn-like tumors to grow out of their heads. Could this be what inspired the original tales of the jackalope? Does it matter either way? Many Native American tribes have legends of the Thunderbird, a powerful nature spirit which takes the form of a gigantic bird, which is capable of causing storms by merely flapping its wings. Some scientists speculate that these legends could have been inspired by Native Americans discovering the fossilized remains of pterosaurs or other dinosaurs. There have been many Thunderbird sightings in recorded history. Illinois seems to have an interesting concentration of Thunderbird accounts. The P.I. Saw Bird is a Native American mural located in Alton, Illinois, which has been maintained since long before Europeans settled in America. The mural is said to depict the bird that eats men. This is similar to other Native American depictions of the Thunderbird. There have been many Thunderbird sightings in recorded history as well. This string of encounters began on April 4th, 1948, in Alton, Illinois. An Army colonel named Walter F. Sigmund was speaking with a local farmer when the two men witnessed a giant bird. Quote, "I thought there was something wrong with my eyesight, but it was most definitely a bird, and not a glider or a jet plane. It appeared to be flying northeast, and from the movement of the object and its size, I figured it had to be a bird of tremendous size." End quote. This is the testimony that Colonel Sigmund later gave to the local newspaper. This is also a good case with a trained observer as a witness. Like I said, this case would soon be printed in local newspapers, along with many other Thunderbird sightings that followed. Colonel Sigmund's encounter was also recorded in the United States Air Force's Project Sign. Project Sign was the first U.S. Air Force study of reports of unidentified flying objects, and is also the grandfather program of the well-known Project Blue Book, which also studied UFOs. Quote, Project Sign, Incident 123. Reliability, impossible to evaluate. Colonel Sigmund was never questioned, but some sort of investigation obviously should be made in lieu of the fact that he was once commandant of Air Force Base Kearns. End quote. Compared to the many other Project Sign files, this one is very empty. Many of the other cases feature large collections of newspaper articles, but this one does not, just a lone clipping, even though there are many articles printed about this, which I'll continue to show on screen. The Air Force also neglected to interview Colonel Sigmund or the following witnesses. On Tuesday, April 6th, 2 more witnesses saw the bird on the opposite end of the state. Robert Price of Caledonia, Illinois, reported seeing a bird, quote, "a bird as big as an airplane," end quote. In Belvidere, Illinois, 2 witnesses see a monstrous bird the size of an airplane. The bird had a long neck and its feet trailed behind it. The witnesses described the bird as a monster, and again compared it to a prehistoric animal. Verrill Babb, a truck driver, described the bird as looking like a pterodactyl. The witnesses both believed that it could be, quote, "a visitor from another planet." The very next day, April 10th, 1948, flight instructors at the Alton, Illinois airport said that a large bird cast a shadow, quote, "as big as a Piper Cub from 500 feet up," end quote. The Piper Cub was one of the most common aircrafts at the time, and was over 22 feet long with a wingspan of over 35 feet. Other witnesses maintained that the birds were as large as small airplanes, far larger than any normal eagle. It was at this time that the original witness, Colonel Sigmund, finally came forward with his story as well, and reported it to the local newspaper. I find it very odd that so many witnesses at the same time were describing seeing a similar creature, and then all of a sudden, the sightings just ended until July 25th, 1977, in Lawndale, Illinois. A boy named Marlon Lowe was playing outside with his friend, but unbeknownst to Marlon, 2 massive birds had been circling him overhead. The birds then began flying towards him in a tight wingtip-to-wingtip formation, chasing Marlon, pecking and clawing at his shoulders. The boy's mother, Ruth, noticed that her son was under attack and ran to Marlon's aid. The larger of the 2 birds sunk their claws into his shirt, fully lifting the boy off of the ground. The Thunderbird carried Marlon roughly 35 feet while being chased by Ruth before dropping Marlon. In addition to Ruth and Marlon Lowe, multiple neighbors also witnessed this encounter. Ruth Lowe was quoted as saying, "It had a white ring around its half-foot-long neck. The rest of the body was very black. The bird's bill was 6 inches in length and hooked at the end. The claws on the feet were arranged with 3 front, 1 in the back. Each wing, less the body, was 4 feet at the very least. The entire length of the bird's body, from beak to tail feather, was approximately 4.5 feet. Had Ruth not come outside at that very moment, she was sure the birds would have carried her son away." Despite this incident having multiple witnesses, the Lowe family became ostracized from their community. As their story was circulated around the local press, Marlin became known to his schoolmates as Bird Boy and was relentlessly bullied. Dead pigeons were tossed onto the Lowe family's porch. Despite this, Ruth Lowe investigated this incident herself by researching in the library. She came to the conclusion that the only bird it could have possibly been was an Andean condor. Andean condors are native to South America, not Illinois. Andean condor are among the largest birds of flight, have a wingspan surpassing 10 feet, and share the white ring around the neck of the birds that preyed upon Marlin. Others speculate that this was the work of a turkey vulture or a black vulture. However, both birds are smaller than what was described. Young turkey vultures have a black head, and they are often misidentified as black vultures. Black vultures have white tips at the end of their wings and flap their wings more often. They are uncommon in Illinois and are more likely to be seen in the extreme southern part of the state, while turkey vultures are extremely common. It's also out of character for a vulture to attack live prey, as vultures consume the remains of the dead. The same year, 1977, at Lake Shelbyville, A.J. Huffer of CBS captured this footage of two possible thunderbirds. Huffer described the birds as huge, all black, and with leathery faces. According to experts, this creature is 3 to 4 times larger than a turkey vulture, which again was a suspect for the Lawndale, Illinois sighting. Patrick Reddick, the director of the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota, said it looks too broad to be a turkey vulture and too long to be an eagle, and that it seems to be more alike to a condor. Though these birds are described as similar to a black vulture, this too is unlikely, as black vultures are smaller than turkey vultures, and their range doesn't extend to this part of Illinois. It's also important to note that Andean condors do have a white ring around their neck, similar to the bird that attacked Marlin Lowe. However, the two birds filmed at Lake Shelbyville lack this white ring, meaning they're likely not the same. In Alaska, there have been numerous reports of birds the size of small aircrafts being seen. These giant birds have been reported in Alaska by pilots flying between Juneau and Anchorage. There have been dozens of these reports in the past 20 years, consistently describing a bird the size of a small airplane. In fact, there have been sightings of this bird as recently as 2018. In October of 2002, residents of 2 Alaskan towns were reporting sightings of a bird said to be, quote, the size of a small otter plane, end quote. Witnesses judged that it had a 14-foot wingspan and was not the kind of bird you'd want flying around if you have small children outdoors. John Bucher, a pilot who had been skeptical of the reports, eventually saw the massive bird himself. Quote, the bird is huge. He's really, really big. The other people in the plane saw him too. You wouldn't want to have your children out, end quote. A heavy equipment operator stated, instead of continuing toward me, it banked to the left, and that's when I noticed that it wasn't a plane. He was concerned enough about the monstrous bird that he radioed to the village nearby, alerting officials about what he had seen and advising that children be kept indoors. Scientists have suggested that the Alaskan encounters could be misidentified stellar sea eagles, which could have flown to Alaska from Asia, but even then, their maximum wingspan is only 8 feet, less than half of what witnesses reported. Sightings of enormous birds in New Mexico, Alaska, Texas, and Pennsylvania have been reported in recent years. Is it possible that a gigantic species of bird exists and one that sometimes preys upon humans? Could these be sightings of remnant populations of long extinct birds, such as Argentavis or Teratornis? Argentavis's wingspan could reach over 20 feet, while Teratornis can have a wingspan of up to 14 feet and is similar to surviving condors. Teratornis lived 10,000 years ago, meaning humans have encountered these monstrous birds. The only question is when the sightings truly ended. The Yeti is a regional variant of the Sasquatch, which allegedly lives in the Himalayan mountains and the surrounding valleys. Historically, the Yeti was perceived as a threat to the people of the region, and a widespread fear of Yeti has been recorded among the Sherpa. The Yeti is sometimes described as having red or brown fur, which only appears white due to being covered in snow. In 1925, a Greek photographer and geologist named N.A. Tombazi took part in a British geological expedition to explore the Himalayas. At 15,000 feet up, Tombazi witnessed something strange. He stated, quote, "Unquestionably, the figure in outline was exactly like a human being, walking upright and stopping occasionally to pull at some dwarf rhododendron bushes. It showed up dark against the snow, and as far as I could make out, wore no clothes," end quote. About 2 hours later, Tombazi and his companions descended the mountain and saw the creature's prints, described as similar in shape to those of a man, but only 6 to 7 inches long by 4 inches wide. The prints were undoubtedly those of a biped. Tombazi did not believe in the Yeti, thinking the figure he saw was a traveling hermit. However, if this was a traveling hermit, wearing no clothes, he surely would have frozen to death. In 1951, the British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition was led by Edmund Hillary and Eric Shipton. They aimed to establish feasible routes to reach the top of Mount Everest. While on the Menlung Glacier, at an elevation of 1,900 feet, his team came upon a path of strange footprints. The prints were 13 inches long and 8 inches wide. Shipton photographed the most well-defined of these footprints and also the trackway itself. He then followed the trail for 3 miles until whatever made these tracks cleared a crevasse, an icy ravine between 2 glaciers, too treacherous for the men to cross. Shipton was quoted as saying, "I have in the past found many sets of these curious footprints and have tried to follow them, but have always lost them on the rocks on the side of the glacier." End quote. In terms of evidence for the Yeti's existence, we also have several Yeti relics held in high regard by the Sherpa. There are some legends of monks conversing with the Yeti, with one folktale involving a monk teaching a Yeti some aspects of spirituality and meditation. Perhaps the Yeti is more intelligent than we may believe. According to members of the Pangbosh Monastery, a monk once walked into a cave to meditate where he saw a Yeti. Many years later, the monk came back to find that the Yeti was dead. He collected the hand and scalp and took them back to the monastery. The Pangbosh hand was treated as a ritual object that was connected to the luck and safety of the monastery, and the monks believed that its theft could bring their downfall. However, this didn't stop mountain climber Peter Byrne from smuggling a Yeti finger out of the country, with some help from his friend, the actor James Stewart. In 1958, Byrne smuggled the bones from Nepal into India, after which actor James Stewart allegedly smuggled the hand out of the country in his luggage, bypassing security by hiding it among his wife's undergarments. The complete hand was stolen in the early 1990s. In December 2011, a genetic study found the Yeti hand to be of human DNA. Proponents of the Yeti use this to suggest that the Yeti and perhaps Sasquatch are very closely genetically linked to humans and could be some sort of offshoot of Homo sapiens, not unlike Neanderthals and Denisovans. Other monasteries in the region also have Yeti relics which served similar purposes. For example, a Yeti skull cap housed at the Kumjung Monastery. Studies on the alleged Yeti scalp found it to be made from the hide of a Himalayan goat serow. However, it is possible that the Yeti scalp which was submitted for testing was not the original because, again, the Sherpa are very wary of giving over religious artifacts to Westerners, and not without reason. On October 3, 2017, the National Archives Museum released a 1959 State Department memo officially titled Foreign Service Dispatch 75 from the American Embassy, Kathmandu, regarding regulations governing mountain climbing expeditions in Nepal relating to Yeti. The regulations outlined by the government of Nepal in this document included a requirement to pay the government of Nepal for a permit, 5,000 rupees, roughly $1,100 in today's currency. They were urged to photograph or capture the Yeti, but not kill it, and to turn over to government agents of Nepal any photos or information of Yeti sightings. The document states that if any evidence of the Yeti's existence was discovered, it was to be given to the government and not disclosed to the press or the public. I wonder how many similar secret agreements have been made, and how many are active today, suppressing evidence of the unknown. Could certain governments have a vested interest in suppressing the existence of cryptids? April 9th, 2019. An Indian Army mountaineer expedition set out to Mount Makalu, the fifth tallest mountain in the world, and only 12 miles south of Everest. Near the Mount Makalu base camp, the military discovered an inexplicable set of footprints. The footprints were 32 inches by 15 inches, much larger than a normal human footprint. The Indian Army has sent their findings to be examined by scientists, and they are quite adamant that this will prove the existence of the Yeti. The Dover Demon. In Dover, Massachusetts, April 21st, 1977, around 10:30, 17-year-old William Bartlett was driving his Volkswagen with his friends Mike Mazzocco and Andy Brody when they encountered the demon. Bartlett's headlights shone on a small figure which he first thought was just a small animal, but he soon realized it was nothing he'd ever seen before. The creature was, quote, standing on a wall, its eyes glowing in the headlights. It was not a dog or a cat. It had no tail. It had an egg or watermelon-shaped head, end quote. The quadruped demon had gray skin, orange eyes, thin, spindly limbs, and tendril-like fingers which wrapped around the stones of the wall. After only a few seconds, the creature fled from the broken stone wall. Bartlett described the figure as more human-like in its form than animal. Its shape reminded him of kids with distended bellies, he said. Quote, I've always tried to guess what it was. I never had any idea, end quote. Bartlett's friends were not quick enough to see the creature. They only saw Bartlett's horrified reaction to the creature. Roughly 2 hours later, 15-year-old John Baxter was walking his girlfriend home. After dropping her off, he began walking back home when he too encountered the demon. He spotted a short, shadowy silhouette in the distance walking towards him. Baxter thought the short figure was one of his friends, so he called out, but to no response. Baxter and the figure continued to approach each other until the silhouette stopped in its tracks. Baxter too stopped and called out again, saying, "Who is that?" As he took another step forward to get a closer look, the figure ran away from him, running down a slope. Baxter followed the creature down the slope, eventually finding it crouched on top of a rock, with its feet, quote, molded to the top. He would later say that the creature he saw reminded him of a monkey, but with a figure 8 shaped head. John would later tell investigators, "What is this? A monkey, maybe?" As I was looking really close there, I could see the eyes. It was looking at me. I just stared at it for a few minutes. End quote. Soon, John began to feel very uncomfortable. I got all these feelings that it was thinking to itself, or waiting to spring or whatever, And so I backed up to the bank kind of fast, and my heart started beating really fast. End quote. Baxter was naturally unnerved by what he saw, and soon ran away from the creature. He was eventually picked up by a couple on the road, who noticed how frightened the 15-year-old was and drove him home. At midnight the next night, Will Tainter was driving Abby Brabham home when the two 15-year-olds saw something in the vehicle's headlights. On the left side of the road, there was a hairless creature, down on all four limbs, facing the vehicle. The body was lanky, and it had a large, oversized, oval-shaped head, and its eyes glowed green. Quote, "As I looked at it, it kind of looked a minute like an ape," she claimed. "And then I looked at the head, and the head was very big, and it was a very weird head. It had bright green eyes, and the eyes just glowed like they were just looking exactly at me." Abby went on to mention that she assumed the creature's eyes might have been reflecting the car's headlights. She described it as having a tan, hairless body and a watermelon-shaped head that was featureless. "That thing has haunted me for 29 years, said Carl Sheridan, a former police chief. "I knew the kids involved. They were good kids, pretty reliable kids. God only knows what they saw. I still don't know. Strange things have happened. The whole thing was unusual." Both Baxter and Bartlett drew sketches of the Dover Demon for the local newspapers and for the police. Years later, at 46 years old, Bartlett was interviewed again and was quoted as saying, "In a lot of ways, it's kind of embarrassing to me. I definitely saw something. It was definitely weird. I didn't make it up. Sometimes I wish I had. I really do wish that I made it up. I might have profited from it. It's a great story." The skeptic's explanation of this incident was that the teens saw a baby moose. Only 2 moose were reported in Massachusetts in 1977 and 78, both of them in central Massachusetts. A yearling moose by that time in April would weigh more than 600 pounds and would be, quote, "bigger than the Volkswagen Bartlett was in," end quote. In a 25-hour period, multiple individuals all claimed to have seen the same being, and in all the time since, it has never been seen again. The locations of the sightings, when plotted, lay in a straight line over 2 miles. All of the sightings were made near water, suggesting that this could be some sort of water-dwelling creature, perhaps. Yumibozu. In Japanese mythology, the Yumibozu, which can translate into sea monk, is a yokai, a creature of Japanese folklore. The Yumibozu is supposed to live on the high seas, where he captures the boats of sinners and drowns those who dare speak to him. Another tradition says that Yumibozu caused storms on the last day of the year. The fishermen, therefore, did not go to sea during this period. Descriptions of Yumibozu vary greatly depending on the source. He is most commonly depicted as a dark-skinned humanoid creature with an enormous round, bald head, reminiscent of the shaved head of Buddhist monks. He would also have huge eyes which glowed in the dark. This type of Yumibozu can change in size and take on colossal proportions, allowing it to rise more than 10 meters above sea level. Other legends describe the Yumibozu as an old man with a very normal appearance, except that he walks on water and has a ghostly appearance. Some people have compared the Yumibozu to sirens of Greek mythology. It's interesting that similar creatures are reported by different cultures who had no contact with one another at the time, and both creatures serve a similar purpose, bringing sailors to a watery grave. One of the more bizarre cryptids, and one of my favorites. The first recorded Mothman sighting took place on November 12, 1966, near Clendenin, West Virginia. 5 men were in a cemetery preparing a grave for burial when they saw something that they couldn't explain. They all witnessed a brown, winged humanoid watching them from the trees. When the men realized that they were being watched, the creature took to the skies. The men were adamant that this was no known bird of any kind, and that it was shaped more like a human than anything else. The next day, November 13th, 1966, in Salem, West Virginia, Merle Partridge heard a loud noise outside of his home. He recalled his television making a high-pitched whine sound, and that his dog had begun to bark wildly. After going outside to investigate, Partridge was startled by 2 glowing red eyes that belonged to no animal he'd ever seen before. He also described an eerie flashing red light that seemed to be dancing around. His hunting dog took off after the creature, and that was the last he saw of either one. He went out to search for his dog with friends the next day, but there was no trace. 2 days later, and 90 miles away from the last encounter I described, on the night of November 15th, 2 teenage couples were driving near the TNT area, a World War II-era munitions facility located on the outskirts of Point Pleasant. Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving in Roger's black '57 Chevy Bel Air with Steve and Mary Millette. It was at this time that the 4 laid their eyes upon the Mothman. They described the monster as 6 or 7 feet tall, having a wingspan of 10 feet and red eyes about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. It was like a man with wings. It wasn't like anything you'd see on TV or in a monster movie, Mary Millette said. The witnesses said that they saw the creature's eyes glowing red when their headlights first shined on it. They quickly drove away from the creature at speeds reaching 100 miles per hour back towards the town of Point Pleasant. Mothman had no trouble keeping up with this speed and catching up to the car. They said the creature was hovering above the car, apparently gliding, until they reached the National Guard Armory on Route 62. The creature followed them on Highway 62 all the way until they reached Point Pleasant. Once within the city, the couples discussed the encounter and tried desperately to rationalize what they had just seen. They thought that maybe what they saw was really just a large bird, so they turned around to search for the creature. Quote, "We went downtown, turned around, and went back, and there it was again. It seemed to be waiting on us," Millette was quoted as saying. The light gray creature then scurried through a field, and they described the creature as a rather clumsy runner. They then heard a sound like wings flapping, and they said that the creature rose straight up like a helicopter. before vanishing. It apparently is afraid of light and maybe thought it was scaring us off. It seemed to want to get away from the lights, Millette was quoted as saying. The witnesses speculated that the creature was living in the vacant power plant, possibly in one of the huge boilers. Quote, "There are pigeons in all the other buildings," Millette said, "but not in that one. If I'd seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything," Linda Scarberry commented, "but there were 4 of us who saw it. They said it didn't resemble a bat in any way, but as maybe what you would visualize as an angel." The 4 teens then went to the police and recounted their story to Deputy Millard Halstead. The deputy stated, "I've known these kids all their lives. They'd never been in any trouble, and they were really scared that night. I took them seriously." The deputy went to investigate, and although he did not see the creature, he saw dust in the vicinity of a coal field that he thought could have been caused by the creature. On screen now is Roger Scarberry's eyewitness sketch of the Mothman. He stated, "I'm a hard guy to scare, but last night I was for getting out of there." End quote. All of the witnesses were pale and tired from lack of sleep following their harrowing experience. The next day, Linda Scarberry was rushed to the hospital by her father after experiencing a nervous breakdown caused by the Mothman. After this encounter, over 100 people in and around Point Pleasant reported seeing the Mothman. In 2002, Linda did an interview for the book Mothman, The Facts Behind the Legend by Jeff Wamsley and Donnie Sargent Jr. In this interview, she described an instance in which she saw the Mothman on her roof in December of 1966. She said, "We saw it again about a month after we first saw it, when we lived on 13th Street. The roof slanted down at an angle from the upstairs bedroom window. I looked out that window, and it was sitting down. Its wings were folded around itself, like it was trying to keep warm. It had its head turned sideways, looking in through the window, as if it was curious. By then, I had figured out that it didn't want to hurt me. I could just tell by the way it looked at me. I was very curious and wanted to communicate with it, but I still didn't know what it was or where it came from, and was a little scared of it, still. It looked so lonely, but not scared anymore. It looked cold, too. It was really cold out that night." In local reporter Mary Hyer's letters to author John Keel on July 2nd, 1967, she wrote about Roger and Linda experiencing more activity of Mothman on their roof. She mentions that Linda's mother, Mabel McDaniel, and says that the roof activity occurred over 3 nights. Those 3 nights being June 29th, 1967 through July 1st, 1967. She said, "Mabel said that Roger and Linda swear that the monster has been on their roof the past 3 nights. Linda even claims that she sees its red eyes and has been a nervous wreck. I really don't know what to think of this deal, if they really see something or just think they do." When asked about if Mothman was good or bad, Linda Scarberry said, "I don't think it ever had evil intentions. It had numerous chances to harm or even kill me and some other people, but it didn't. I think its main intention was not to get hurt itself. A lot of people tried to kill it or capture it. I don't think it would have hurt anybody or anything. A lot of dogs started turning up missing, and a lot of people blamed that on the Mothman, but I don't think it was him." Another witness, Connie Carpenter, was driving home from church at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, November 27th, 1966, when she suddenly saw a huge gray figure. She said that it was shaped like a man, but much larger, at least 7 feet tall and very broad. The thing that attracted her attention was not the creature's size, but its eyes. It had large, round, fiercely glowing red eyes that focused on her with a hypnotic effect. She's quoted as saying, "It's a wonder I didn't run off the road and have a wreck." As she slowed, her eyes fixed on the apparition, a pair of wings unfolded from its back. They seemed to have a span of about 10 feet. It was definitely not an ordinary bird, but a man-shaped thing, which rose slowly off the ground, straight up like a helicopter, while making no sound. Its wings did not flap in flight. It headed straight towards Connie's car, its horrible eyes fixed to her face. Then it swooped low over her head as she shoved the accelerator to the floorboards in utter hysteria. After her Mothman sighting, Carpenter's eyes were red, swollen, and itchy, with water coming out of them for 2 weeks afterwards. Connie suffered from Klieg conjunctivitis, which is caused by exposure to ultraviolet light. Interestingly enough, this is also seen in some UFO witnesses. Connie was one of the few to claim a very close look at the Mothman, and Connie, like Roger and Linda Scarberry, would claim to have multiple encounters with the Mothman. And we'll be discussing Connie later on in the Iceberg, because she was also witness to the Men in Black. Two volunteer firemen who saw the Mothman described it as a large bird with red eyes. Contractor Newell Partridge claimed when he aimed a flashlight at the creature in a nearby field, its eyes glowed like bicycle reflectors, and blamed buzzing noises from his television set and the disappearance of his German Shepherd dog on the creature. A woman named Marcella Bennett described it as roughly 6 feet tall and that its body was covered in gray feathers. She claimed that it was hunched over, looking at her, and she saw no red eyes, which is consistent with the creature's eyes only glowing red when light shined on it. The Mothman was also witnessed by Marcella Bennett's nephew as she entered her sister's house, and the Mothman followed her. The nephew shined a flashlight at the Mothman before it turned and disappeared. Marcella Bennett reportedly suffered a miscarriage after the incident. Another witness, identifying as R.M., stated, "We didn't glimpse it, we clearly saw it. Whatever it is, it does exist, and I'm not sure how anyone could get a picture of it. I could have had a camera in my hand and still would not have. When it looks at you, it somehow paralyzes you. For the first hour or so after, we couldn't move or even talk. Then, for about the next hour, all we could say was, 'What the fuck was that?' We still couldn't move. It looks nothing like a moth. Looks more like a bat than a moth. I can only hope to never see it again." End quote. Mothman's reported ability to paralyze could be another example of a large predatory animal using infrasound the same way that known predatory animals do. High Strangeness and Fortiana gripped Point Pleasant. According to the San Antonio Express, a dog was handed into the police station. It had been found dead, but with no injuries. When it was examined, its heart was found to be missing, but there was no incision, no sign of surgery. Its heart was just gone. Farm animals were also found in this state, with missing organs but no signs of scar or injury. The small West Virginia town surpassed even Roswell in the number of UFO sightings. 100 people witnessed a huge craft 7 stories high rising from the Ohio River with dozens of smaller vessels coming out of it. One witness took pictures with a Polaroid camera, but despite the crafts producing bright lights, all photographs came out pure black. In addition to the UFO and Mothman sightings, Point Pleasant residents experienced premonitions of the collapse of the Silver Bridge and encounters with an otherworldly being known as Injured Cold, who we'll go over in the next level of the iceberg. Mary Heyer, a reporter at the time of the Mothman sightings, received over 500 phone calls, not only in regards to this mysterious creature, but also strange lights in the sky, electrical interference, strange humming sounds, and of course UFO sightings. Again, recountings of the 1966 through 67 Mothman reports usually state that at least 100 people saw a Mothman, but there are allegedly many more witnesses who were afraid to report their sightings after being threatened by mysterious men in black. These witnesses were reportedly threatened against publicizing their encounters. The Mothman was also allegedly sighted during the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1967. This tragic event occurred when the suspension bridge collapsed during rush hour traffic, killing 46 people after a single link cracked, starting a deadly chain reaction. There is a photo of the Silver Bridge showing what is supposedly Mothman clinging to the side, yet this is likely just one of the top pieces of the bridge falling onto its side. Mason County Sheriff George Johnson commented that he believed the sightings were due to an unusually large heron he termed a shite poke. Wildlife biologist Dr. Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University thought that Mothman was a sandhill crane, which the newspapers then reported on, but the witnesses completely disagreed. Other skeptics have suggested the Mothman was merely a barn owl, but I find this to be unlikely, given that West Virginians would be familiar with barn owls. After the Silver Bridge collapse, the Mothman largely vanished from Point Pleasant. Many have speculated that perhaps this creature is an omen of disaster or a foreshadowing of death and tragedy. There is speculation as to whether or not the Mothman intends to warn humanity of crises or that he is a bringer of doom. In 2016, there was an alleged Mothman sighting in West Virginia, wherein the witness captured 3 photos of the creature, which you're seeing on screen now. The man called into the WSAZ news station and reported that he saw the Mothman while driving on Route 2 in Point Pleasant. The man, who only recently moved to the city, claimed that he was not even aware of the legend prior to taking the pictures. There have been other Mothman sightings which are too numerous to mention here, such as alleged sightings in Friedberg, Germany before a mine collapse, at the Fukushima nuclear meltdown in Japan, and in New York City on September 11, 2001. On top of this, there are other Mothman cases, such as the Owl Man of England, the Blackbird of Chernobyl, and also an interesting spike of Mothman reports in Chicago, which we'll get into later on in the iceberg. Injured Cold and the Men in Black also have their own entries in the iceberg, which I'll also be covering. Bat Squatch, May 18th, 1980. Mount St. Helens erupts in the most powerful volcanic explosion in the United States history. At least 57 people were killed and over $1 billion worth of damage was caused. However, at this time, an unknown cryptid revealed itself. There are scant reports of a large, winged humanoid seen flying across the ashen skies after the eruption. Though there are alleged newspapers documented these sightings, none can be found. It's possible that these have merely yet to be digitized in any form. Some theorize that the eruption of Mount St. Helens released the Bat Squatch to the surface, and that the being dwelled in underground caverns before escaping. On April 19th, 1994, we have our first documented sighting of the Bat Squatch. At 9:30 on a Saturday night, 18-year-old Brian Canfield was driving near Mount Rainier when his truck suddenly stopped. The engine seemed to fail, but the headlights were still on. The headlights came to illuminate a 9-foot-tall being with dark blue fur, yellow eyes, sharp teeth, tufted ears, and large bat-like wings the length of the road. In an interview with the local newspaper, Brian was quoted as saying, "Its eyes were yellow and shaped like a piece of pie, with pupils like a half-moon. The mouth was pretty big, white teeth, no fangs. The face was like a wolf." The writer of the newspaper article included the following details to try to verify Brian's integrity. Quote, "He doesn't listen to heavy metal, and he doesn't play Dungeons and Dragons. He's never seen a UFO." End quote. Sandra Canfield, Brian's mother, has been interviewed since the incident and says that Brian does not like to discuss his encounter with the winged beast and says that she still believes him. In 2009, HPI, Haunted and Paranormal Investigations International, received the following account of an encounter with what could have been the Bat Squatch. "Me and my friend were hiking around Mount Shasta, and out of one of the crevices flew out this big creature. I mean, this thing was huge. It was as tall as a man, as stocky as Hulk Hogan, and had leathery wings. I believe the wingspan was at least 50 feet from one end to the other. I was holding up my camera, but was paralyzed with fear as this thing flew by. I didn't get a picture, sorry. What do you think this might be? Could it have been a pterodactyl? It was flying or gliding fast. It seemed to have the head of a bat. Thinking about it, it doesn't have the head of a pterodactyl. I just saw a picture of one, and the heads are not similar. I would think it had the head of a bat, or maybe more like a fox. The damn thing finally flew into a clump of trees and vanished. I heard you guys might be going back to Mount Shasta. If you do, please look out for this thing. If you see it, you will shit all over yourself. I kid you not." In October of 2015 in Missouri, there was another sighting of the Bat Squatch. Driving down the gravel road to the Blue Spring trailhead, a woman named Sarah suddenly shouted for her husband to stop the car. What Sarah saw in the wilderness was something she struggled to comprehend. Quote, "She was staring at a winged entity 7 to 8 feet tall with leathery wings from its shoulders to the ground, black in color with pointed ears on a triangular head. Its yellow eyes stared at her, making her feel very uncomfortable." End quote. In 2021, a woman identifying only as Hernandez was hiking along Ape Canyon Trail, the same Ape Canyon named after the Bigfoot encounter. Quote, "I nearly fainted when this big hairy winged thing landed on the trail. I heard this deep beating sound, and then it landed right in front of me. Her Pomeranian, Daisy, went insane barking at it." From all sightings of this creature, we see that it seems to dwell at and around mountains. Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, and Mount Shasta. It seems that this creature, if it exists, dwells around mountainous areas. Furthermore, Mount Rainier and Mount Shasta are locations associated with high strangeness. Mount Shasta is a UFO hotspot and has a multitude of Bigfoot and other cryptid sightings as well. It is also the site of a supposed ancient underground city inhabited by an intelligent race of gigantic humanoids, with connections to Lemuria and the lost continent of Myuu. The Native Americans have legends going back for centuries about tiny people who also once lived within this area, who used to throw rocks at the natives when they would enter their territory. In our modern day, there are strange, unexplained disappearances that take place in Mount Shasta, the strangest of which involve a grandmother who suddenly passed out and awoke to find her grandson missing. The boy who went missing and was later found explained that he had been taken by a, quote, robot that looked and sounded just like his grandmother, and he also said that he was taken to a huge underground cave that was filled with other robots. Given the Bat Squatch's strange amalgamation of features, it's possible that this being is a chimera, a man-made animal, a genetic monstrosity. Other theories state that given the bat squatch's alleged appearance at the eruption of Mount St. Helens, that the creature is a misidentified Mothman, though there are noted differences between the two cryptids. In May of 1950, a mountaineer and skier by the name of Jim Carter suddenly and mysteriously disappeared in Ape Canyon while out on a climbing expedition with 20 other people on a warm, clear day. A subsequent search would turn up footprints that seemed to suggest that the missing man had been frantically running as if he was being chased, even careening down steep embankments and hurtling recklessly across crevices. One searcher, mountaineer, and member of the Seattle Mountain Search and Rescue Unit, Bob Lee, has said that there was a constant sense of being watched from the woods during the search. He would say of the expedition, quote, "It was the most eerie experience I have ever had. There was something strange on the high slopes of the mountain. I could feel the hair on my neck standing up. It was eerie. I was unarmed, except for my ice axe, and believe me, I never let go of that." Carter's complete disappearance is an unsolved mystery to this day. Dr. Otto Trott, Lee Stark, and I finally came to the conclusion that the mountain devils got him. The rescuers followed Jim's footprints until they'd simply ended abruptly. Did mountain devils abduct Jim Carter? And if so, were these mountain devils the same beasts which took part in the Battle of Ape Canyon? Or, given that Jim's footprints ended so abruptly, was he perhaps taken into the sky by a winged mountain devil like the bat squatch? The Mongolian death worm. Under the scorching heat of the most desolate regions of the Gobi Desert, lurking underneath the sand, is a headless, blood-red monster known as the Mongolian death worm. In Mongolian, the death worm is called Olgoi Korkoi. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but it means intestine worm, due to its blood-red color and being the size of an intestine, with most accounts placing the creature at 2 to 7 feet in length. It has been described by many to have the ability to evade the sun and other life forms by tunneling underground. Allegedly, the creature creates waves in the sand on the desert's surface when it travels underground, which is the only way to detect the creature. According to Mongolian legends, the death worm can spit out a corrosive yellow saliva, and in some tales, possesses the ability to generate blasts of bioelectricity, both of which it uses to hunt. The death worm is said to roam the southwestern Gobi Desert and hibernates underground most of the year, except for June and July, when the creature becomes active. Indigenous people claim the invertebrates lay eggs inside of a camel's stomach, likely after killing the camel via acid or shock. Upon hatching, they absorb the color of their host's blood and results in a brightly saturated, red-hued body. If larger food sources are unavailable, they will consume rodents and other types of vermin. Locals say that the monster is most often seen on the surface after a heavy rainfall. The death worm was first introduced to the Western world by an explorer named Roy Chapman Andrews, but since Mongolia had been under Soviet control until 1990, little information escaped the Soviets' iron fist, and not much was known about the death worm. In recent years, investigators have been able to look for evidence of the creature's existence. The Mongolian Prime Minister, Domdin Bazar, who, in 1922, described the worm as shaped like a sausage about 2 feet long. It has no head, nor leg, and it is so poisonous that merely to touch it means instant death. It lives in the most desolate parts of the Gobi Desert." End quote. One particularly intriguing account involves a small boy who is playing with a bright yellow ball, which unfortunately got the attention of the death worm. Residents claim that this particular color attracts the beast. When the curious young boy approached it, he reached out and gently touched its flesh. Within mere seconds, the unsuspecting child was deceased. His parents soon discovered their son's corpse and immediately recognized the post-mortem symptoms. The enraged parents went to hunt for the monster and to slay it. Neither parent ever made it back to the village alive, and townspeople suspected that they had been killed by the monster. Ivan Mackerel, one of the leading Loch Ness Monster detectives, studied the region and interviewed many Mongolian people about the worm. Ivan collected the legends of the locals and described the worm as a sausage-like worm over half a meter long and as thick as a man's arm, resembling the intestine of cattle. Its skin serves as an exoskeleton, molting whenever it's hurt. Its tail is short, as if it were cut off, but not tapered. It is difficult to tell its head from its tail because it has no visible eyes, nostrils, or mouth. To me, the most interesting account of the death worm comes from a man named Sugi, a Mongolian who served as Ivan's interpreter. According to Sugi, during his childhood, a party of geologists visited his home region. One of the geologists was driving an iron rod into the sand when he suddenly collapsed. His colleagues rushed over to him, but he had been killed before he even hit the ground. They began to investigate what had happened, as there was no obvious cause of death. But it was then that the sand began to churn, and the death worm unearthed itself. Apparently, the death worm used its bioelectricity to execute the geologist. Due to the sheer volume of sightings and strange deaths, Ivan came to the conclusion that the death worm was more than just a legend. Scientists speculate that the death worm may be a carnivorous reptile, usually called a worm lizard, although they're not actually lizards. These burrowing creatures reside throughout sub-Saharan Africa, South America, and several Caribbean islands, and could be the basis for this legend. The infield horror. We're starting off with one of the weirdest cryptids. At about 9:30 on the night of April 25th, 1973, in Enfield, Illinois, Henry McDaniel came home to find his children terrified. The children saw a thing that tried to break into the house through the door, and then through the window. McDaniel noticed that the window's air conditioner had been jarred out of place by something. It was then that they all heard a scratching sound at the front door. Henry looked out and saw something, a figure that he thought might be a bear. Taking a gun and flashlight, he headed out and saw a creature within the brush. He would later describe it as having 3 legs, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. He said that it had an almost human-like body, and it stood 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored. McDaniel fired 4 shots at the creature, with one shot hitting it and causing it to make a hiss, much like a wildcat's, before fleeing towards a nearby railway embankment, covering 50 feet in only 3 jumps. McDaniel called the police, who investigated the area and found footprints in the soft earth near the house, which were dog-like in shape, but had 6 toe pads. The police would say that they considered McDaniel to be, quote, rational and sober in his reporting of the incident. In a later interview, McDaniel said, "If they do find it, they'll find more than one, and they won't be from this planet, I'll tell you that." In the early hours of the morning, Henry McDaniel was startled awake in the dead of night by the howling of some neighborhood dogs. McDaniel pulled himself out of bed and opened his front door. Quote, "I saw something moving out on the railroad track, and there it stood. I didn't shoot at it or anything. It started on down the railroad track. It wasn't in a hurry or anything." End quote. White County Sheriff Roy Pashard Jr. was so upset by the sudden influx of press and curiosity seekers looking for the monster, as well as the hysteria that was settling in on the public, that he threatened to incarcerate McDaniel if he didn't stop, quote, inciting panic by spreading his wildly terrifying tale. 5 men even came to Enfield specifically to hunt the Enfield horror. These amateur monster hunters were arrested for doing so. After their arrest, residents of Enfield expressed fears that press coverage would lead to further monster hunters who may inadvertently shoot citizens or livestock. Prior to their arrest, the monster hunters were patrolling the area near the railroad track where the monster had been sighted, when they claimed that they discovered the beast hiding in the underbrush and proceeded to open fire on it. But, much like the original sighting, Their bullets were futile, and the monster bolted off at a speed that the eyewitnesses claimed was far beyond anything a human would be capable of. The final eyewitness of the Enfield horror was Rick Rainbow, the news director of radio station WWKI. Rainbow and 3 others claimed to have seen the gray, 5-foot-tall being lurking outside an abandoned house not far from McDaniel's home. Rainbow and his crew claimed that he and his crew managed to record the scream of the monster. But unfortunately, this recording has never been posted online anywhere, so we don't have access to it. These reports were covered by the news media at the time, with some suggesting they may have been caused by a wild ape or escaped kangaroo, or otherwise caused by mass hysteria. Interestingly, there was another sighting of a cryptid 30 years earlier and 40 miles away. This beast was known as the Mount Vernon Monster, which also had the same leaping ability as the Enfield horror. This leads some to believe that the 2 monsters are connected in some way. Some investigators have suggested that the Enfield monster was associated with a spate of UFO sightings that allegedly plagued the region during the same time period. Why did the Enfield monster disappear? From what we do know, it didn't seem to behave like an intelligent extraterrestrial, yet it too was associated with UFO encounters and then vanished and has never been seen since. What happened to the audio recording of the Enfield horror? Did it ever exist at all? Could something like that really be lost? The Flatwoods Monster, or Braxton County Monster. To properly explain this cryptid, I need to give you some context. A lot of this comes from the author and investigator Frank Fascino Jr., who has studied this case for over 20 years and has written multiple books on the subject. The United States of America and Soviet Russia were engaged in the Cold War. Both countries were paranoid of the other's growing arsenal of nuclear weapons. During this Cold War, the summer of 1952 saw one of the biggest waves of UFO sightings in recorded history and has since been called the Summer of Saucers. The encounter with the Flatwoods Monster becomes infinitely more credible when you realize that Flatwoods is the end of the story. As I said, this took place during one of the largest UFO waves in history, and thousands of these sightings were reported to the United States Air Force Project Blue Book. On the weekends of July 19th and the 26th, UFOs began appearing over Washington, D.C. For hours, these UFOs flew through the restricted airspaces of the Capitol and the Washington National Airport. The UFOs over the Capitol can be seen on screen now. During this period, the United States Air Force felt threatened by the repeated incursions of UFOs into United States airspace, and so an order to shoot down the UFOs was given. September 12, 1952, the United States Air Force was alerted to a mass UFO sighting along the East Coast. UFOs were seen over 10 different states. The fighter pilots had orders to follow the UFOs and give them orders to land. If the unidentified crafts refused, they were to be shot down. On this day, there were 21 hours of sustained UFO activity. Author and investigator Frank Fascino studied all of the UFO reports, finding 116 locations over 10 eastern states in which UFOs were seen. Using these reports, Fascino was able to reconstruct this series of events and the flight paths of 4 separate UFOs, which entered the eastern United States from the east and the south. One of the UFOs even changed its path, making a 45-degree turn from west to south. The United States Air Force's Project Blue Book file on the Flatwoods Monster incident blamed all of the UFO sightings on a single meteor, which is impossible. The USAF states that they were able to confirm their single meteor theory with the Akron Astronomy Group in Ohio. I reached out to the same group but got no response. I find this all very odd, especially given that there are no meteorological documents of meteors flying over the United States on this day. Only Project Blue Book. September 12, 1952, 7:15 p.m. in Flatwoods, West Virginia. A group of children who were playing football witnessed the bright object cross the sky. The object flew overhead and landed on property belonging to a local farmer. on the highest flat area in the region. The object made no sound when it landed. Some of the boys believed that it was a meteor, while others were convinced that they had witnessed a flying saucer. Jack Davis, one of the children who saw the object fly over Flatwoods and land that day, said that it didn't resemble a meteor at all. Quote, "The object I saw was a craft. It had a brighter, illuminated light at the top, which was a kind of orange-red." On screen now you can see his eyewitness sketch of the craft. On their way to investigate the landing of the object, the three boys stopped at the home of the two young May boys to tell their mother what they had seen. The May's house was at the entrance of the farm property where the object landed. The boys explained what they had seen to Miss May. And together, Miss May, the 6 boys, and one of their dogs ascended the remaining quarter-mile to get a close look at the object. As they came near the object, the party's dog ran away out of fear. They heard a hissing noise and smelled a noxious, sickening odor. As they approached the object, they passed a tree, and just behind it was the Braxton County Monster. The being was said to be 12 feet tall. It hovered next to the tree and looked down on the witnesses with glowing round eyes through an ace of spades shaped hood. It had no arms, though most artistic depictions of the creature add arms. Freddie May, who again was a child at the time, would say in later interviews,
From where you're filming right there now is where it was. Left of the tree right here, and approximately it had a limb that come out over the road. I guess there's a limb right here that's a little better than 12 feet up to that limb. It was standing out under that limb, so we figured it was about 12 foot tall or in that neighborhood from that there. I think it was mechanical. It wasn't alive. Maybe inside the thing there could have been something that was alive, but what I seen was either a small spaceship or a suit of some kind that something was wearing. It was mechanical.
Miss May shined her flashlight on the creature for a brief second before the entire group ran away. When the police investigated later, they found no trace of a meteor, no impact crater, nothing. Nuclear physicist and ufologist Stanton Friedman would later investigate the case, and has been quoted as saying that Flatwoods would have become flattened woods if there had been a meteor impact that day. Lee Stewart, publisher of the Braxton Democrat, accompanied police and managed to coax one of the oldest boys, Gene Lemon, into returning to the site. He knew the witnesses and believed them. He has been quoted as saying, "I was the first person to get to the Mays house. It was sheer turmoil. 3 of the boys that were there were very sick at their stomachs. All of them were wheezing and coughing. Miss May's eyes were as red as they could be. Everyone was talking at once, so I just sat and listened for a while, and as soon as I realized the whole thing had taken place on the mountain right beside the house, I started asking if I could get somebody there to direct me to the spot. Of course, the answer was an empathetic no, but after a little coaxing, I convinced the 2 oldest boys to go up the mountain back with us, and so we left the house. We were armed. We had a 12-gauge automatic shotgun, a couple handguns, and 2 or 3 local people that lived right around there came by, and they went with us. I've never seen people more in fright. Once they reached the top of the hill, the creature itself was gone, but they could still smell the odor on the ground." Further inquiries at the Lemon house revealed that Miss Lemon and a friend were having coffee at the time of the landing, and their house shook so violently that coffee spilled over the table, and they thought the house had fallen off its foundation. Their radio went off for 45 minutes and then came on by itself. At 6:30 the next morning, the local director of the Board of Education saw a flying saucer take off not far from his house and immediately reported it to the newspaper. A 21-year-old girl from Weston, West Virginia, 11 miles from the Lemon Farm, was confined in the Clarksburg Hospital for 3 weeks after witnessing a figure of the same description as the Flatwoods Monster and emitting the same odor reported by witnesses of the initial occurrence. Her mother confirmed the girl's story and said that they had seen the monster when they were on their way to church. The day after the Braxton County Monster incident, a similar being was seen 17 miles away. On September 13th, 1952, George Snetowski, his wife Edith, and their 18-month-old son were driving through the mountainous roads from Frametown, West Virginia, on their way back home to New York, when their car stalled and died abruptly on a deserted roadside. George attempted to start the car, but to no avail, when suddenly the air around him became engulfed with a noxious, foggy mist smelling like burnt sulfur. It was then that a beam of deep purple light flashed across the hood of the car. They noticed that the purple light came from the forest next to the car. The putrid smell of sulfur at this point had penetrated the car's interior, with all three of them coughing and gagging, and the baby began to scream and cry. George got out of the car to investigate the source of the light. As he walked deeper into the woods, away from his family, he clearly saw a glowing object a ways into the forest. He quickly turned and headed back to the relative safety of the car. As he neared his car, George leaned against a tree to try to catch his breath, but the sulfur was still suffocating. At this point, his wife screamed, and George turned to see the Braxton County Monster. The description is similar to that of the original sighting, except in this case, the monster was not wearing the upper portion of its machinery. The entire upper body of the creature was uncovered. The face was reptilian and bony. It had a bloated body with long, spindly arms and two fork-like fingers. Suddenly, without any warning, the being moved towards him. George said the figure seemed to glide over the ground. George believed that the creature was chasing him, but soon it was out of sight, and simultaneously, the car came back to life. This case was documented in the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book, and the U.S. military deployed soldiers to investigate Flatwoods. The only logical explanation is that the Flatwoods Monster was merely a barn owl, and the witnesses' perceptions were warped by their fear, but this still doesn't explain all of the anomalies. I'll delve into the connections with Project Blue Book, UFO sightings over Washington, D.C., the cover-up of a United States Air Force jet fighter that disappeared chasing UFOs, on the extraterrestrial or alien or ufology iceberg. If you're interested, I suggest looking into the works of Frank Fascino Jr. I'll leave the links in the description. Globster. This is a very real and well-documented phenomena wherein strange masses of flesh wash up on shores worldwide. These chunks of meat are often hairy. There's no single explanation for this phenomena. The term was coined by Ivan T. Sanderson in 1962 to describe the Tasmanian carcass of 1960, which is said to have no visible eyes, no defined head, and no apparent bone structure. Other examples of globsters include the St. Augustine Monster, the Chilean blob, and also the Montauk Monster. Hellhound. The concept of hellhounds were born in mythology. Cerberus from Greek mythology is the multi-headed dog who guarded the gates of the underworld, preventing the dead from leaving and making sure that those who entered never left. In some legends, Cerberus has 3 heads, but in others he has 50 or even 100 heads. In some later myths, Cerberus had 3 dog heads, the rest of them being the heads of snakes spurting from his back, with the venomous one also serving as his tail. A similar figure appears in Norse mythology. Garmr, or Garm, is a wolf associated with the realm of Hell and Ragnarok, and described as a blood-stained guardian of Hell's Gate. In one of the poems of the Poetic Edda, Garm is said to be to canines what Odin is to gods and what Yggdrasil is to trees, the greatest of its kind. There are also many recorded sightings of black dogs, which seem paranormal and extraordinary. There are legends of giant, devilish hounds that were said to haunt Britain's villages and countryside, bringing doom, tragedy, and death in their spectral and demonic wake. They are usually much larger than normal dogs and said to possess a pair of large, glowing eyes, often red. They were also accompanied by the smell of sulfur or burning brimstone. They were said to frequent graveyards, old roadways, crossroads, and bridges, and are almost unanimously associated with the realm of the dead. It was believed that if one of these black dogs was seen, it meant that a tragedy would soon unfold. These creatures were said to be anything from the ghosts of dead travelers to spirits of dead hounds awaiting the return of their masters, forbidden knowledge to being the devil himself. France, AD 856. A black hound was said to materialize in a church even though the doors were shut. The church grew dark as it padded up and down the aisle as if looking for someone. The dog then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The most recent sightings of hellhounds that I could find occurred in Connecticut, Kentucky, Louisiana, Ohio, as well as Vilseck, Germany, often in or near cemeteries. Given this creature appearing across mythologies and legends, one must wonder if there's something more to this tale. An interesting modern encounter with a hellhound took place in Romulus, Michigan. A witness, identifying as S. Costia, was living with his family in a cabin on a farm surrounded by a dense forest. Quote, "We had this really strange dog, or creature, that would hang around the property. I say dog creature because this thing was far too big and intelligent to be a stray dog. It had very pronounced red eyes. I'm not saying it was a werewolf or a dog man, but it was very werewolf-like. The dog would frequently stalk the edge of the woods on our property in the day. It seemed to have no fear. My uncle would yell at it or throw things towards it to try to scare it off, but it would simply rear up on its hind legs like a ram and charge at him for a short distance. We would frequently find dead chickens or rabbits after thunderstorms. We knew it was the dog thing because it would leave huge paw prints in the mud and claw marks on the window ledges. Sometimes we would find the screens ripped from our screen doors and our windows. It would never outright attack us, but it did seem to enjoy taunting us and harassing us. One summer night, my mom had left the window open in my bedroom to cool the room off so I could sleep. She was on her way to the bathroom and went by my room and heard me talking to someone. When she opened the door, she saw me standing in my bed, and I had apparently wet my pajamas. I was talking towards the window. I wasn't screaming or freaking out, but seemed to be transfixed and talking in a low voice towards the window. When she looked towards the window, the dog had its two front paws pushed through the screen and was looking through the window at us and making a low growl. Its eyes glared red. I always recall its eyes. You could see its eyes out in the woods sometimes at night. I still have bad dreams about it from time to time. Over the next few weeks, the witness allegedly displayed odd behavior, and the house pets would not go near him. He would also blurt out cryptic messages such as, "We don't want you here," "Our ghosts are food," or "God thinks you're bad," and would sometimes intentionally prick himself with sharp objects until he drew blood. This saga of high strangeness ended when the witness's uncle fired upon the creature, striking it in the rear. The witness's family was left alone by the entity after this, and the witness himself went back to normal. The Loveland Frogman. Again, for this case, I have to give you some context first. 1955 was a year of strange encounters, and this one is definitely weird. The story of the Loveland Frogman is often misunderstood, and details are warped or omitted by retellings and even media organizations like Snopes. But I've dug up the most accurate information from interviews with Frank Whitecotton, Chief Coordinator for Civil Defense in Cincinnati, Police Chief Fritz, and the witness himself, conducted by paranormal investigator and ufologist Leonard Stringfield. Stringfield became interested in the case after hearing unconfirmed reports of FBI involvement. After meeting with Whitecotton, he then connected Stringfield with Police Chief Fritz. According to the police chief, the incident occurred one evening, early in July 1955, or possibly late in June. The witness was a 19-year-old volunteer policeman named C.F. note that the media's coverage of this and later retellings would wrongly describe the witness as a prominent businessman. CF was driving his civil defense truck over the only bridge into Loveland when he noticed a terrible smell hanging over the area. He then noticed movement and looked to see 4 small figures moving oddly on the riverbank beneath the bridge. CF immediately drove to police headquarters in Loveland and reported the incident. When Fritz was asked about the FBI's involvement, he denied it, but began acting uncharacteristically nervous. Chief Fritz even tried to change the subject after this question. When the original witness was interviewed, he initially didn't want to discuss the incident with anyone at any time at all. CF said that he was ridiculed for his experience, and was even forced to quit his job with the civil defense because of the harassment. Because of this, CF was very bitter, but finally divulged some information. CF stated that he saw 4 more or less human-looking little men, about 3 feet high, and that they had been moving about oddly under the bridge, and that there had been a terrible smell about the place. He had only seen them for about 10 seconds. Their most distinguishing characteristic being their frog-like heads, which apparently bore deep wrinkles where their hair should have been. Allegedly, CF's story was printed in the local newspaper, but the original newspaper has never been found, and since we don't have the original newspaper article, there's no way to know if he gave more details to newspapers initially, which could be where the other details repeated in later retellings comes from. In 1972, 2 police officers would see the Frogman. On March 3rd, 1972, at 1 a.m., Loveland police officer Ray Shockey was patrolling near the Little Miami River. The officer was driving slowly due to ice on the roads when he saw what looked like a dog by the curb. The unidentified animal scurried across the road in front of his vehicle. Suddenly, the officer slammed on the brakes in order to prevent slamming into the creature. The cruiser slid and came to a halt, and its headlights fell upon the prone animal. It was fully illuminated in his vehicle's headlights, and he described it as 3 to 4 feet long and about 50 to 75 pounds, with leathery skin and a frog or lizard-like face. In the span of seconds, Officer Shockey stated that the animal crouched like a frog, stood on 2 legs, and stared back at the policeman, then scrambled over the guardrail and scurried down the embankment into the Little Miami River. Officer Shockey's sister drew this sketch of the creature from her brother's testimony. The second officer, Officer Matthews, investigated the scene later that evening. He saw no sign of the creature, but reported that there were distinct scratch marks on the guardrail where the animal purportedly crossed. On March 17th, Officer Matthews was driving outside of Loveland when he saw what he thought was roadkill. He stopped his car to remove the carcass from the road when the creature stood up and got into a crouched position. It was the same creature, the Frogman. It hobbled over to the guardrail, and Officer Matthews fired at the creature, but he seemed to have missed as the creature didn't slow down at all. This is the officer's original story, and they both agreed that the sketch was the creature that they saw. A farmer in Loveland also saw the creature during the same month as the 2 police officers. The 2 officers, like CF before them, both faced ridicule and humiliation for their encounters. In 2016, a photo surfaced of an alleged frogman, but in the end, this was an admitted hoax. Following the fake sighting, Officer Matthews called a news station to report that he had actually shot and killed the creature weeks after the original 1972 incident, and had identified it as merely a large iguana that was missing its tail. If this was the case, why did he change his original story from the creature escaping? And why did the 2 men agree that the sketch of the Frogman was an accurate depiction of the creature they both saw? Fortean investigator Ron Schaffner, who looked into this case and interviewed both Officer Matthew and Officer Shockey, believes that the 2 were going back on their original story to divert attention away from themselves. Quote, "Why, after all these years, is Matthews debunking the story? I'm not sure. Could be a number of reasons, but both officers told us that it resembled the sketch in 1976. Why would they show us a composite drawing of this creature back in 1976 and tell us that it looked like the drawing? Just maybe Matthews is tired of hearing the story and all the variations." End quote. Why was Chief Fritz unwilling to discuss the case when he spoke openly of other cases even more bizarre, such as the Branch Hill encounter and other strange reports of, quote, "smelly little men" in Loveland? Was the FBI ever involved in this case, and if so, why? Was this creature really just a large iguana, or something alien? Reptillians. Legends of reptilians have existed for thousands of years. Archaeologists have unearthed 7,000-year-old humanoid lizard statues from Mesopotamia, and the Hindu Vedic scriptures depict the Naga as shape-shifting lizards. Many people report being abducted by UFOs and encountering reptilian beings aboard the crafts. Theories range from the reptilians coming from the Alpha Draconis star system and or living in caverns or deep underground military bases here on Earth. Another theory is that the reptilians have the power to shapeshift and take the form of humans, disguising themselves to blend in with the elite political class and control our world. Personally, I've always felt that this theory is a way to cope with how cruel and psychopathic certain politicians, bankers, and world leaders can be. I'm kinda keeping this one short because I'm gonna be doing an alien or UFOlogy iceberg, and we're gonna talk a lot more about reptilians there. Yowie. The Yowie seems to be another regional variant of the Sasquatch, native to Australia. However, there are some key differences in the reports. The Yowie is said to be taller than the North American Bigfoot on average, between 9 and 12 feet tall. It is also said to have red or brown fur and claws on its hands and feet. It is also noted that the Yowie has 2 large, fang-like canines and a wide, flat nose, which can distinguish the Yowie from other Bigfoot species. The most prominent difference between the Yowie and the Bigfoot is in the Yowie's behavior and aggression. The first accounts of the Yowie come from the oral history of the Aboriginals who first inhabited Australia. The Aboriginals even created statues of the Yowie, some of which can be seen on screen now. To me, the fact that the Aboriginals had legends of such a creature long before Westerners arrived, who would then also witness the creature, lends this a little more credence. The first European encounter took place in 1882, and sightings continue to this day. While researching the Yowie, the best resource I found was the Yowie Hunters website, which contains numerous newspaper clippings, eyewitness sketches, and sightings of the Yowie. Here you can see a map of Yowie sightings. It is primarily seen around Australia's eastern states. However, the most famous piece of Yowie evidence, the Australian counterpart to the Patterson-Gimlin film, is the Piper footage, which you're seeing on screen now. In terms of behavior, the Yowie is said to be far more aggressive than the North American Sasquatch. Some researchers believe that the Yowie is responsible for particularly strange missing persons cases in Australia. One of these researchers is Dean Harrison, co-founder of the Yowie Research Group. Harrison claims he was nearly killed twice by Yowies, and has also been quoted as saying, "There are a lot of people who go missing in the bush, and the cases remain unsolved, and it is usually put down to homicide. But I think some of these are the work of Yowies." End quote. And, according to Harrison, there are similar legends of Yowie abductions told by the Aboriginals. Harrison has investigated reports by everyone from Aboriginals to federal agents, and believes that some tentacle of the Australian government is studying and researching the Yowie. Harrison states that he was in contact with people stationed at the Canungra Army Base in 1998. When security was doing their usual checks around the base, they found the door of the mess hall unlocked and ajar. As they drew near, the soldiers heard the sounds of pots and pans clanging together. The men crept inside and found a large, bipedal, great ape going through the kitchen. The soldiers ran out, closed the doors behind them, and locked the creature inside. They called for their superiors, federal agents, who came and were able to put some sort of tracking device the size of a 50-cent piece between the Yowie's shoulder blades before releasing it back into the wild, and that they've been tracking it ever since. Harrison also recounted a tale of how the body of a Yowie was discovered by a young Aboriginal boy in the year 2000. The body was reportedly found lying face down in a creek. Quote, "I've spoken to the witness, and they said that some unknown federal group came up from Sydney and transferred the body. Not a word was said since. They phoned the police station and asked what happened, and they said that they knew nothing." It's theorized that a creature like the Yowie, much like the other Sasquatch-type beings, could be the descendant of Gigantopithecus, a massive, extinct great ape, or perhaps something similar. Another hypothesis is that the Yowie could be some kind of living Homo erectus, the presence of which in prehistoric Australia is suspected but not proven. Like the Bigfoot, there are more esoteric explanations for the Yowie as well. Some encounters with the creature are said to leave a strange electric phenomena behind, suggesting that this could be more than just a flesh and blood ape. The Aboriginals have said that the Yowie is most likely to be seen during a storm, when the electric charge of lightning may be present. The Dulugal, as tribes in northeastern Victoria have called the Yowie, is said to live in another dimension, which echoes Native American lore about the Sasquatch. Is it possible that an Australian ape could exist and evade capture for so long? Or is the Yowie a more mystical and ethereal being from another plane of reality? And if so, what does it want with us? Dragon. Mythical creatures, which are essentially giant flying lizards that can breathe fire. All cultures from east to west have legends of dragons. In Eastern mythos, dragons are benevolent, more serpentine beings and can fly without the use of wings. However, in the West, dragons are more malevolent and have a taste for eating humans and terrorizing countrysides by breathing fire. The Peliuda appeared in the Middle Ages in France. The beast was a gigantic, dragon-like creature, but instead of being covered entirely in scales, it had long green fur on its torso and a tuft of sharp, venomous quills on its back. The French sources tell us that the beast was serpent-headed and serpent-tailed, ox-sized with an egg-shaped body, and that the creature had broad, tortoise-like feet. Like most dragons, the Peliuda was capable of breathing fire and threatened the French by murdering people and livestock, burning crops by breathing fire, as well as ruining crops by causing floods merely by entering a nearby river. One man's fiancée was eaten by the Peliuda, and he set off for revenge. He learned that the beast's tail was its weak point, and managed to slay the dragon. Anthropologist David E. Jones argues that belief in dragons is so widespread among ancient cultures because evolution embedded an innate fear of predators in the human mind, particularly for reptiles and serpents. It's possible that these universal fears have been combined in both folklore and mythology to create the myth of the dragon. A study found that approximately 39 people in 100 are afraid of snakes, and also notes that the fear of snakes is especially prominent in children, even in areas where snakes are rare. The earliest attested dragons all resemble snakes or have snake-like attributes. Jones therefore concludes that dragons appear in nearly all cultures because humans have an innate fear of snakes and other reptiles that were major predators of our primate ancestors. Dragons are usually said to reside in dank caves, deep pools, wild, mountainous reaches, sea bottoms, and haunted forests, all places which would have been fraught with danger for early human ancestors. The Hydra, a many-headed dragon-like monster which lurked in the Lake of Lerna, an alleged entrance to the underworld. In the canonical Hydra myth, the monster is killed by Heracles, or Hercules, as the second of his 12 labors. The Hydra was capable of regeneration and healing. The demigod Heracles fought and killed the monster by cutting off its heads and one by one burning the bloodied stumps to prevent the heads from regenerating. The Hydra had other parallels in ancient Near Eastern religions, such as the Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian mythology, which celebrated the deeds of the war and hunting god Ninurta, credited with slaying 11 monsters on an expedition to the mountains, including a 7-headed serpent, as well as the Myuu, whose constellation, despite having a single head, was later associated by the Greeks with the Hydra. Skinwalker. To the Navajo, the Skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. The Navajo believe that there are places where the powers of both good and evil are present, and that those powers can be harnessed for either one. Medicine men utilize these powers to heal and aid members of their communities, while those who practice Navajo witchcraft seek to direct the spiritual forces to cause harm or misfortune to others. This type of Navajo witchcraft is known as the witchery way, which uses human corpses in various ways, such as tools from the bones and concoctions that are used to curse, harm, or kill victims. In order to practice their good works, traditional healers learn about both good and evil magic. Most can handle the responsibility, but some people can become corrupt and choose to become witches. These evil witches are said to form secret societies, which gather in dark caves or secluded places to initiate new members, plot their activities, harm people from a distance with black magic, and perform dark ceremonial rites. During these gatherings, the Skinwalkers shapeshift into their animal forms or wear only beaded jewelry and ceremonial paint. The leader of the Skinwalkers is said to usually be an old man who is a very powerful and long-lived Skinwalker. In order to become a Skinwalker, one must be initiated by this secret society, requiring the evilest of deeds, the killing of a close family member, most often a sibling. After this task has been completed, the individual then receives supernatural powers. This gives them the ability to shapeshift into animals. Most often, they are seen in the form of coyotes, wolves, foxes, cougars, dogs, and bears, but they can take the form of any animal. They then wear the skins of the animal they transform into, hence the name Skinwalker. Sometimes, they would wear animal skulls or antlers atop their heads, which is said to bring them more power. They are said to be able to run faster than a car and have the ability to jump high cliffs. They can control animals, possess bodies of human victims if a person looks them in the eyes, and after taking control, the witch can make its victims do and say things that they wouldn't otherwise. One way that it's said you can tell a Skinwalker apart from a real animal is their eyes. Their eyes are very human-like, but when lights are shined on them, they turn bright red. Alternatively, when they're in human form, their eyes look more animal-like. Skinwalker Ranch is a paranormal hotspot and one of the most famous locations prone to high strangeness. The land was said to have been cursed by the Navajo long ago. It is said that the Skinwalker roams the area of the ranch, and the Navajo do not go there even to this day. The U.S. government has spent billions of dollars researching the wide variety of paranormal phenomena there. Among the oddities of Skinwalker Ranch, there are sightings of Bigfoot, dogmen, orbs, strange lights, cattle mutilations, and many UFO sightings. Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters received this account of a recent possible Skinwalker sighting on Highway I-191 near Skinwalker Ranch. Quote, "My friend drove a tractor trailer for a few years a while back. He told me he was driving a rig very late at night in northeast Utah on a lesser-used 2-lane highway. He said he remembers feeling very alert that night, so he noticed what appeared to be a figure manifesting up ahead on the dark road. He told me it wasn't on the road but just next to it. He then comes to a stop and grabs his heavy-duty flashlight and points it at the figure. According to the witness, this humanoid creature was feeding on a dead coyote while crouching. The truck had grabbed its attention and pissed it off, so it sort of stands up so he can get a full view of the truck. It was giant, pale, hairless, with very big eyes, and of course, the coyote blood all over its face. Its height was over 6 feet, and it had skinny limbs and no clothing. He then describes how it started to shuffle slowly towards the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at the time, all he had was the long flashlight that he's using to view the creature. He decides to book it, hit the gas, and leave. He had no problem passing it. He looked in his mirror to see the creature standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away. He came to a stop at a nearby truck stop, where he allegedly met with 2 other men, other truckers, who also saw the creature and were shaken up. The Fresno Nightcrawler. The Fresno Nightcrawler is a bizarre cryptid which looks like a pair of disembodied legs, very thin, and with gray or white skin. In some sightings, the creature is said to walk with strange backwards knees, with some kind of webbing connecting the knees to the upper body. According to the Fresno Bee, the first sighting of these beings were captured by a man named Jose in 2007. Jose observed the Nightcrawlers on his front lawn through CCTV. He woke up his brother to rewatch the footage. After this, his brother claimed to have seen small footprints outside, but by the time investigators made it to the site, all evidence was washed away. Jose brought the footage to Univision, hoping to find answers, but was left unsated. The original CCTV footage has since been lost, and now all that remains is the recording of the monitor the footage was playing on. In the second episode of Sci-Fi's Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, the team attempted to recreate the video to see how it could have been faked. They tried using a combination of pants on a string, but this recreation didn't match the original. They eventually deemed the Nightcrawler unexplainable because they failed to recreate Jose's footage in any convincing way. In Yosemite National Park, footage was taken from another security camera. This time, there are 2 creatures, one being very small. You can also clearly see the feet of these creatures, as well as what appears to be some sort of webbing connecting the knees to the upper body. We also have to talk about the 2014 Carmel area creature. The witness, a 60-year-old ex-Marine, yet to be named, and his wife were driving near Carmel on December 12, 2014, when they came up over a hill and saw a creature 7 feet tall, slender, and gray, which is now known as the Carmel area creature. The witness said the following, quote, "We recently bought a place in the Fort Hill area in southeast Highland County. We first noticed after about 30 days of living here that we suddenly had a perfect circle that stays fresh green no matter what weather in our front yard. On Friday night, the 12th, we were driving home. After turning on Carmel Road, which leads to our road, we went around the curve by the Carmel Church and then up a small incline, and approximately 10 feet over the incline and in front of our truck, the alien ran across the road and into the woods. On screen now, you can see the eyewitness sketch of the creature. April 25th, 2020, in Billings, Montana, the Nightcrawler was seemingly captured on security camera footage again. This video also has audio, and it seems that the Nightcrawler can be heard making pig-like sounds. The next day, a deer carcass was found close to the area where the video was captured. Though it's a bit of a stretch, and the creature has never been observed displaying aggressive behavior, this deer could be a victim of the Nightcrawler. While there have been claims that the Nightcrawler is part of certain Native American legends, this has been debunked. Other videos of the creature have been proven as hoaxes, including a video of an encounter from Poland. There are different theories as to what the Nightcrawlers are, or if they're even real or not. Some believe that they could be an undocumented species of primate, which I think is very unlikely, or that these could be a strange race of extraterrestrials. Centaur, another creature from Greco-Roman mythology. Centaurs are a horse-human hybrid, with the head and neck of a horse being replaced by the upper body of a human. Centaurs are very powerful and make deadly warriors. The most notable centaur was Chiron, who trained many of the Greco-Roman demigods and heroes of legend, such as Heracles and Achilles. Surprisingly, there have actually been sightings of centaurs in the modern era as well. In North America specifically, there have been a multitude of these sightings, mostly by Native Americans. The following is another account forwarded to Lon Strickler's Phantoms and Monsters. And by the way, if you're interested in this stuff and you've never looked at phantoms and monsters, I definitely recommend you do so. When my father's friend was younger, he was a deputy for the Apache Reservation Police. I believe it happened in the early 1980s, but not sure. One night, he was on patrol in his squad car, alone on the reservation. He was driving along the deserted highway that passed through town. When he reached the church, he saw something moving back and forth. peering into the windows of the church. He stopped the car on the highway and observed for a little while. It was too dark to make out much at first. Then, the creature noticed him and began moving out of the shadows and into the front of the church. The creature came into the headlights of the police car, finally illuminating what he had been watching. The being was described as an 8-foot-tall demon centaur. The bottom half was indeed a dark-haired horse, while where the neck and head should have been was the upper torso of a man. The man was staring right at him as it strolled by, all 4 hooves clanking on the pavement, and it had horns on either side of his head. He said they were like ram horns, curled around on either side of his skull. He was terrified, and while he thought of shooting the beast, he reasoned against it. He didn't want to provoke it and have it attack him. It completed crossing the road and down a steep slope into a farmland below. Once it reached this open ground, he watched as it started to run away as fast as possible until it disappeared into the darkness and trees beyond. He was deeply troubled after the encounter and couldn't reason why such a demonic creature would be looking into a building as holy as a church. The way he told the story, you couldn't help but believe it to be true, and I'm sure that it actually happened." End quote. Here is the eyewitness sketch of the creature. This is only one of several cases of centaur sightings I've been able to find. Is it possible that a creature from Greek mythology could walk the earth even today? Gargoyle. Gargoyle has the same root word as gargle because gargoyles channel water out of their mouths to prevent rainwater from simply running down the walls of buildings and ruining the masonry. But other than just being architectural structures, they were believed in mythology to frighten away evil spirits. But the idea of these statues physically coming to life is a more recent idea. Like golems, which we're going to talk about later, gargoyles are usually made of magically animated or transformed stone, but have animal or chimera traits and are often guardians of a place such as a cathedral or a castle. They can also be depicted as vessels for demonic possession or as a living species resembling statues. Even to this day, there are actually a lot of reports of winged humanoids or bat-like creatures being spotted in the skies of Earth. There have been recent reports of a being described as a gargoyle in Florida from 2017 to 2018 and onward. Again, this is another report from Phantoms and Monsters. Quote, 2 weeks ago, I had the night off, so another guy I work with took my route. In case you don't know, Brooksville, Florida and Zephyr Hills, Florida are both riddled with dark roads with no streetlights and just trees to the left and right side of the road. Apparently, when he was driving between his 3rd and 4th stop near Zephyr Hills on Route 98 at about 3:30 p.m., he said he saw this thing floating stationary about 15 feet off the ground next to a tree. As he got closer, he realized it looked like a dark-colored humanoid in a cannonball position, just floating in the air, like frozen. He said by the time he asked himself, "What the fuck is that?" the creature unraveled itself, and it spread out its legs and giant bat-like wings. He didn't know what color the creature was, but he said it was definitely a dark color, and it had human-like legs. At the same moment it spread its wings and legs, it flew towards his truck at an unrealistic speed like a fighter jet. He said he almost crashed the truck in the ditch because it basically paralyzed him with fear. He said it happened so fast he didn't get a look at the face, but he said it was probably between 5 and 6 feet tall, dark colored, and it had human legs with bat wings. He also said that about a half a mile before he saw the creature, he saw a bunch of dead deer on the side of the road, like piles of deer, 2 separate piles of at least 4 deer. He assumes it was eating them. The witness is a pretty soft-spoken dude and intelligent. The way he tells the story, I can tell it really freaked him out. End quote. This is only one of many modern reports of flying humanoids. Lon Strickler has been keeping up with these reports and has even launched the Winged Humanoid Project to collect these anomalous reports. It makes you wonder if such creatures could truly be stalking the skies and what their true nature really is. Gnomes. In European folklore, gnomes are dwarfish, subterranean goblin or earth spirits who guard mines of precious treasures hidden within the earth. They're represented in medieval mythologies as a small, physically deformed, usually hunchbacked, creature, resembling a dry, gnarled old man. Gob, the king of the gnome race, was said to rule with a magic sword and is said to have influenced the melancholic temperament of man. The term gnome was popularized through the works of the 16th century Swiss alchemist Paracelsus, in which gnomes were described as diminutive figures, 2 spans in height, who did not like to mix with humans. They are said to be capable of moving through solid earth as fish move through water. Despite being a common staple of fantasy and mythology, sightings of dwarves and gnomes persist to the modern era. There are actually a lot of these sightings, more than you would probably think. There has even been a mass sighting of gnomes. We have a video of an alleged gnome encounter from Argentina, 2008, in the province of Salta. Quote, "We were chatting about our last fishing trip. It was 1 in the morning. I began to film a bit with my mobile phone, while the others were chatting and joking. Suddenly we heard something, a weird noise as if someone was throwing stones. We looked to one side and saw that the grass was moving. To begin with, we thought it was a dog, but when we saw this gnome-like figure began to emerge, we were really afraid. This is no joke. We are still afraid to go out, just like everyone in the neighborhood is now. One of my friends was so scared after seeing that thing that we had to take him to the hospital." End quote. While researching this, I came across many reports of similar sightings of gnomes and other entities. In Detroit, of all places, there are many gnome sightings which date back to pre-colonial times from the Native Americans. Sightings of these creatures tie back to the concepts of the Fae and an unseen, supernatural world or dimension that exists alongside ours, giants. There are legends from every culture and every faith of gigantic humans. However, some believe that these giants are much more than myth. President Abraham Lincoln believed in giants, and it seems that it was just taken for granted that a race of giants had once lived in North America. Quote, "The eyes of that species of extinct giant, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now." End quote. There are numerous old newspaper articles that tell of giant skeletons being unearthed in North America and in other locations. These giant skeletons were alleged to have a unique trait, a double row of teeth. Though these could be cases of yellow journalism, there are other cases of explorers encountering people of giant proportions, living giants. A prominent example of this is the Patagonia giants. They were said to have exceeded at least double normal human height, with some accounts giving heights of 12 to 15 feet tall or more. Tales of these people would maintain a hold upon European conceptions of the region for some 250 years. The first mention of these people came from the voyage of Ferdinand Magellan and his crew, who claimed to have seen them while exploring the coastline of South America en route to the Maluku Islands and their circumnavigation of the world in the 1520s. One of the officers wrote in his account about their encounter with natives twice the height of a normal person. Quote, "One day we suddenly saw a naked man of giant stature on the shore of the port, dancing, singing, and throwing dust on his head. Captain Magellan sent one of our men to the giant so that he might perform the same actions as a sign of peace. Having done that, the man led the giant to an islet where the captain general was waiting. When the giant was in the captain general's and our presence, he marveled greatly and made signs with one finger raised upward, believing that we had come from the sky. He was so tall that we reached only to his waist, and he was well proportioned." End quote. In 1579, Francis Drake's ship captain wrote about meeting a very tall Patagonian of 7.5 feet tall, and in the 1590s it was claimed that dead bodies 12 feet long were found in Patagonia. The giant of Castelnau refers to 3 bone fragments, a humerus, tibia, and a femoral midshaft, discovered in 1890 in the sediments used to cover a Bronze Age burial site. These fossilized bones may belong to one of the largest humans ever known to have existed. It was estimated that from the bone size, this person may have been 11 feet tall. Apparently, these bone fragments of what would be the tallest person in history were lost 100 years ago. and this ties into the conspiracy theory that the skeletons and relics of these giants are being hidden and suppressed by the Smithsonian and other archaeological institutions for nefarious purposes. The square cube law tells us that a human-like giant of extreme proportions couldn't exist, because as size increases, so does weight, and doubling height can result in weight being multiplied, meaning that a giant of sufficient size should have his bones snap from merely walking, not to mention possible organ system issues from this vast size. Despite this, giants appear in most world religions and in the folklore of countries around the world. Slender Man, or Slender, is a character created on the Something Awful forums in 2009 as part of a Photoshop contest. The entity quickly became a popular creepypasta character, with many authors making their own additions to the story, constructing a mythos around the character. Slender Man is an abnormally tall humanoid, ranging from 6 to 14 feet tall. He possesses a featureless, ghost-white face and always wears a black suit. Slender Man has an arsenal of supernatural abilities, ranging from mind-reading, teleportation, and the ability to conjure tendrils from his back. Slender Man lurks in dark forests and stalks those unlucky enough to cross his path, and usually his victims are children. Slender Man stalks his victims, watching them from the shadows until they either mysteriously disappear or lose their sanity. In these stories, some of the victims become Slender Man's proxies after being driven insane, after which they are forced to do his bidding. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, two 12-year-old girls, Anissa Weir and Morgan Geyser, as well as their best friend, 14-year-old Peyton Leutner, became obsessed with the Slender Man mythos and had total faith in his existence. Over the course of several months, the two 6th grade girls hatched a plan to kill Peyton in order to please Slender Man. They finally found the perfect opportunity, a slumber party to celebrate Morgan turning 12, thinking that they would become servants of Slender Man after Peyton's murder. Anissa and Morgan hoped to escape to Slender Man's mansion, which they were certain was located hundreds of miles north. May 31st, 2014. The three were playing hide-and-seek in the forest of David's Park. Little did Peyton know that this was the end game of their secret plan, and that her best friends were luring her into a trap. Anissa and Morgan pinned Peyton down and stabbed her 19 times in the arms, legs, and torso with a 5-inch long blade. 2 wounds were to major organs, and 1 missed a major artery of the heart by less than a millimeter. Another went through her diaphragm, cutting into her liver and stomach. Anissa and Morgan told Peyton that they would find help, but never had any intention of doing so. They left their best friend to bleed out in the woods. However, Peyton was able to drag herself to a nearby road, where she was found by a cyclist who quickly called 911. Morgan and Anissa were found walking towards what they believed was Slender Man's mansion, and apprehended. Morgan had told Anissa that if they didn't sacrifice Peyton to Slender Man, their families and loved ones would be killed. Anissa admitted this during police interrogation, and went on to say that she believed her. During her interrogation, Morgan said that she regretted the attack, but that it was necessary to please Slender Man. In the aftermath of this case, Morgan was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which her father also suffered from. This hereditary mental illness was kept secret from her by her parents, who wanted her to feel normal. This horrendous crime is known as the Slender Man stabbing. Though Slender Man was created on the internet, the belief is powerful enough to cause real bloodshed. Golems, mostly originating from European or Jewish folklore. Golems are creatures made of stone or earth and usually animated by an outside force such as magic. I was able to dig up a modern encounter of an animate being made of stone, which is not from older folklore. And this one is pretty weird. In the summer of 1970, in Hot Springs, Arkansas, Roger Sheffield and his 2 friends, Terry and Bob, all 3 college sophomores, decided to go waste a few hours together. At 7 a.m., they arrived at the parking lot of the Hot Springs Boys Club, which overlooked a complex of 4 baseball fields. After 2 hours passed, it began getting dark and they decided to leave. Quote, "When we decided to leave the place, we all got into the car and we passed the rear security light, one of those lights that seems to make everything appear a lavender color," Roger said. At that light, Roger and Terry talked Bob into stopping the car for a bathroom break before they finally left. After leaking their lizards, Roger states, quote, "As I turned around to face the direction of the trail, which crested the driveway from below, near a 15-foot lone pine tree next to the light, suddenly, a very large form rose from the lower fields, coming up, not as if walking or stepping, but more like floating up from below. The 2 men froze. Quote, "This thing looked like someone had concreted a very, very large man in a diving suit, bell helmet and all, and contoured the head into the shoulders as if there were no neck, no facial features, only smooth gray but lavender tinted from the guard light." The creature stopped, and Roger felt that it was because this being noticed himself and Terry standing at the top of the hill. Quote, "It appeared that I was only looking at the thing from the waist up. It was almost a third as tall as the 15-foot tree next to the trail, and at least 3 feet across at the shoulders. The thing appeared to be, potentially, some 10 feet tall." The 2 men then broke free from their shock and ran back to Bob's car and escaped. Quote, "We'll never know what that thing was," Roger said. "The only description I've had for it all these years is a golem, a mud man, because that's exactly what it looked like, an enormous clay-like figure rising up from the dark before us, featureless, massive, and unlike anything I've ever seen since that night. Occasionally, I see drawings made by those who have been abducted by extraterrestrials, or have had close encounters of some kind, and ever so rarely, I'll see something akin to what we saw that night at the Hot Springs Boys Club. The implications of this are insane. What exactly are golems? What are these creatures that people have been seeing for so long? Could they be not of this world?" Griffin. In mythology, the griffin is used as a metaphor for the ultimate beast or predator, given that it is made of the greatest land and sky predators, the eagle and the lion. If you remember in part 1, we went over specific sightings of gigantic birds, such as the Belvedere thunderbird. If such a creature existed, then it's possible that maybe griffins or something akin to griffins could exist also. Vampires. Tales of nocturnal, undead, blood-sucking monsters are some of humanity's oldest fears. These monsters have burned themselves into our collective consciousness. Vlad Tepes, or Vlad Dracula the Impaler, was a warlord who would impale his victims on iron rods outside of his castle, where some victims would survive in absolute agony for days on end before finally succumbing to their wounds. Vlad would also allegedly drink the blood of his enemies and also dip his bread in it. Vampires are commonly thought to originate in Romania, but this just isn't true. Though there are older tales of similar undead monsters from across the world, our modern idea of vampires originates in medieval Serbia. Austrian forces returning from conquests in Ottoman Serbia in the early 1700s brought back vampire stories, which is then circulated throughout Europe. The word vampiri entered Western languages from Serbia in the late 1720s. In 1725, Petar Blagojevic lived and died in the village of Kisiljevo, Serbia. His wife, now widowed, claimed that her husband knocked on her door after the funeral, demanding his shoes before attempting to strangle her. Blagojevic remained active over the next 9 nights, attacking 9 more villagers. On waking, each victim reported that Blagojevic had laid himself upon them and throttled them. After suffering a mysterious, quote, 24-hour illness, all of Blagojevich's victims died. However, the locals knew that they would become vampires. Arndt Paul was a Serbian guerrilla fighter who served in the Imperial Austrian Army and fought against the Ottoman forces that controlled Turkish Serbia. During his time in the military, it's said that he was attacked by a vampire. During the fight, the vampire managed to sink its fangs into the mortal man before he successfully slayed the vampire. Arndt knew that he too would die and rise again as a vampire, unless he went to the vampire's original grave and ate from the earth of its grave and smeared the vampire's blood on himself, which is exactly what he did. Arndt believed that he had saved his soul from the vampire's curse. However, it seems that he wasn't that lucky. After returning from war in 1727, Arndt married and settled down in a village called Medvedja. The same year, Arndt broke his neck and died in a tragic horse-drawn cart accident. Roughly 1 month later, 4 people came forward, claiming that they were attacked by the undead Arndt. All 4 of Arndt's victims died shortly after. It's also believed that at some point, Arndt fed from the blood of cattle, perhaps before attacking human victims and trying to stave off his vampiric hunger. The villagers were advised by a military official who claimed to have dealt with vampires before to open his grave. They saw that the corpse was, quote, undecomposed, with all the indications of an arch-vampire. They found that fresh blood flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, that the shirt, the covering, and the coffin were all completely bloody, that the old nails on his hands and feet, along with the skin, had fallen off and new ones had grown. His body was red. His hair, nails, and beard had all grown again. They concluded that Arndt was a vampire. They drove a stake through his heart, and allegedly, he reacted by shrieking as if he was still alive, groaning and bleeding. They then decapitated him and burned his corpse. They then did the same to Arndt's victims to prevent them from becoming vampires as well. 5 years after the death of Arndt, 17 people died in under 3 months from alleged vampire attacks in the same village. On December 12, 1731, the Austrian emperor ordered that an inquiry should be carried out. It was believed that Arndt was the original cause of these new vampires because it was believed that Arndt fed from the blood of cattle in the area. The emperor's inquiry led to one of the most important sources for the history of vampirism, a medical report, a visum et repertum, meaning seen and discovered, was written and attested by military surgeons in Serbia based on this case of vampirism. It was signed by 5 officers, and 3 of them were doctors, and all of them should have been extremely familiar with corpses, having served in the army that had fought and defeated the Turks between 1714 and 1718, though most of these traits of vampirism are now known as normal processes of decomposition. There were many other similar cases where it was believed that people were rising from the grave, becoming vampires, but oftentimes this was because the villagers insisted on being buried next to the church, and eventually, as the space filled up, the graves became shallower and shallower, and something as simple as a heavy rainfall could cause corpses to rise up from the grave. Sava Sivanovic is one of the most ancient and feared vampires. Even modern-day Serbians living in the village of Zorazhe fear him. According to legend, Sivanovic would murder and drink the blood of anyone who came to use his watermill. Over the years, the fear of this vampire kept a powerful grip on the villagers, who refused to go anywhere near the mill at night and forbid tourists from going so. Quote, "We were welcoming tourists, but only during the day. Nobody ever overnighted there," said the man whose family owned the mill for over 60 years. In 2012, Savanovic's lair collapsed, reinvigorating the old fears of the ancient vampire. Quote, "We were too scared to repair it, not to disturb Sava Savenovic. It's even worse now that it collapsed due to lack of repair." After the collapse, the villagers began to fear that Savenovic may have been awakened and is now once again on the prowl in the forested mountains of western Serbia. The Pope Lick Monster. In Louisville, Kentucky, there exists a railroad bridge 100 feet tall that overlooks Pope Lick Creek. Kind of a weird name. This is said to be the home of a deadly beast, the Pope Lick Monster, or the Goat Man, a dreadful chimera with the body of a man and the head, horns, and greasy hair of a goat. According to some legends, the Pope Lick Monster uses its powers of hypnosis or voice mimicry to lure in its victims, only for them to be killed by an oncoming train, reduced to roadkill. In other legends, the Goat Man jumps from the bridge and onto cars which pass under. There are multiple different origin stories for the Pope Lick Monster. In one tale, the Goat Man was a mutant human-goat hybrid, which was captured and put into a freak show. In another version, the creature escaped after a train derailed on the trestle. Another version claims that the monster is really the twisted reincarnation of a farmer who sacrificed goats in exchange for dark powers, Satan, Lucifer, or Baphomet. Several people have died on or near the train bridge in search of the Goat Man. On April 23, 2016, a young couple climbed onto the bridge and decided to hunt for the monster. While walking the train tracks, the train came barreling towards them. They had nowhere to go. The 26-year-old woman was hit dead on by the train and passed away. Her boyfriend survived by hanging on to the side of the bridge. In 1994, a man was killed by the train after his ATV overturned on the trestle, trapping him on the track. For every entry on the Iceberg, I've been including the stories told by those who have seen these cryptids. However, there are no witness reports of this creature. Does this tell us that the Goat Man is mere folklore, or that none of his victims have lived to tell their tale? Krampus. Krampus is a horned, demonic, goat-like humanoid which acts as a sort of counterpart to Santa Claus or Saint Nicholas in Germanic and Austrian folklore. Krampus exists to frighten children and punish them. He is hairy, usually brown or black, and has the cloven hooves and horns of a goat. He is sometimes described as a wicked, hairy devil. His long, pointed tongue lolls out, and he has menacing fangs. Krampus carries chains, thought to symbolize the binding of the devil by the Christian Church. He thrashes the chains for dramatic effect. In some tales, he wields only birch rods, while in others, he wields a pitchfork or a whip to attack children with. Sometimes, Krampus appears with a sack or basket strapped to his back to cart off evil children for drowning, eating, or to transport to hell. Krampus's actual origin dates back farther than Christianity, and it wasn't until the 17th century that he was linked to Santa Claus. It's believed by folklorists that Krampus comes from a pagan supernatural being that became assimilated with the Christian concept of the devil. In pagan tradition, predating Christianity, people would masquerade as a devilish figure known as Percht, a two-legged humanoid goat with a giraffe-like neck wearing animal furs. Leprechauns. Leprechauns are a staple of Irish folklore, commonly described as resembling a very small human with red hair and green clothing. In many legends, they spend their spare time making shoes, and if you catch one, they'll grant you wishes or riches from their pot of gold. Floridian marine reptiles. I'm not exactly sure what this entry on the Iceberg is referring to, but many Floridians report seeing unidentified reptiles off the coast. These reptiles are said to have crocodilian heads, 2 front fins, and a long, trident-shaped tail. Florida is ranked number 1 worldwide in invasive reptile species, so if nothing else,
It's highly likely that Floridians can encounter reptiles that are alien to their area, even if they aren't exactly sea monsters. Trolls. In Old Norse sources, trolls are said to be small humanoids which dwell in isolated mountains, rocks, and caves. Trolls sometimes live together in groups and are almost never welcoming of humans. In later Scandinavian mythos, trolls are said to be directly hostile towards humans and even have a hunger for human flesh. Trolls are said to possess supernatural strength, which allows them to crush human skulls with ease and even rip humans limb from limb. Luckily for us lowly mortals, trolls are said to be dim-witted and turn to stone if they touch sunlight. The unicorn is a legendary creature seen in myths and stories for thousands of years by multiple different cultures. It is usually depicted as a white horse with a long straight horn. The unicorn was mentioned by ancient Greek writers such as Pliny the Younger, although the unicorn became much more popular in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Commonly described as an extremely wild and rare creature, and a symbol of purity and grace. In bestiaries, the unicorn horn was described as having the power to heal sickness and purify poisoned water. Jinn, a spirit from Islamic folklore, which in the cosmic hierarchy are below angels and devils. Contrary to popular belief, jinn can be good or evil. It's said that jinn are spirits of fire and sometimes wind, and can take on any form they choose, animal or human, and can be of any size. They're commonly described as shadowy ghosts with no individual structure, similar to sightings of shadow people. Jinn are said to possess magical powers, which enable them to shapeshift, move and fly very quickly, enter human bodies, and cause illnesses. And there are some legends of humans attempting to make jinn their allies through use of magic. Jinn are said to dwell in all conceivable inanimate objects, such as stones, trees, ruins, underneath the earth, in the air, and even in fire. They possess the bodily needs of humans and can even be killed, but they are free from all physical restraints. Jinn delight in punishing humans for any harm done to them, intentionally or unintentionally, and are said to be responsible for many diseases and all kinds of accidents. Belief in jinn was common in early Arabia, where they were thought to inspire poets. Leviathan, a gigantic sea serpent said to encircle or make up the foundations of the earth, according to Abrahamic faith. Many scholars believe that the concept of the Leviathan comes from Tiamat from Buddhism and Jormungandr, otherwise known as the world serpent from Norse mythology. Roc, usually described as a white or tan-colored bird, its wingspan was reported to be as large as 48 feet in length, complete with feathers as big as palm trees. The roc was so big that its eggs were said to be over 150 feet in circumference, and according to Arabic tradition, the creature would only land at the center of the world. In the 13th century, the explorer Marco Polo stated, "It was for all the world like an eagle, but one indeed of enormous size, so big in fact that its quills were 12 paces long and thick in proportion. It is so strong that it will seize an elephant in its talons and carry him high into the air and drop him so that he is smashed to pieces. Having so killed him, the bird swoops down and eats him at leisure." Is it possible that a bird this large and powerful could have existed at some point? Aswang. The aswang is a creature from Filipino folklore and is described as an inherently evil, vampiric, werewolf-type creature, and appears in many myths in different forms. It's really an umbrella term for various shape-shifting evil creatures in Filipino folklore, such as vampires, ghouls, witches, viscera suckers, and werebeasts. Spanish colonists noted that the aswang was the most feared among the mythical creatures of the Philippines, even in the 16th century. Capiz is said to be the home of the aswang. In the 1950s, the American CIA used the aswang as a weapon of psychological terror. During the events of World War II, the Huks were guerrilla soldiers who fought on the side of the Allied powers against Japanese invaders on Philippine soil. The U.S. granted the Philippines independence in 1946, just 10 months after the end of World War II. After World War II, American forces entered the Philippines and double-crossed the Huks. Though some guerrilla militias and American forces saw the Huks' methods as terroristic and needlessly murderous, the Hucks expected to be treated as allies for fighting the Japanese, who the Americans obviously weren't fans of at the time. But the Hucks were instead forcibly disarmed, charged with treason, and in some cases slaughtered. Once an ally to the U.S. forces during the war, the Hucks took up arms once again after the war when they were expelled from Congress by then-President Manuel Roxas. The Hucks opposed the controversial Bell Trade Act, which gave the U.S. vast control over Philippine industries and economy. The CIA was eventually brought in to face the Hucks rebellion, and, as they do, the CIA thought of a dastardly psychological warfare technique. CIA officers killed Hucks, drained their blood, put puncture marks on their necks, and left their corpses hanging upside down to scare the superstitious and sympathetic townsfolk. The same pattern of holes, animal bites, and carcasses were seen across the countryside in quick succession. It rattled those would-be sympathizers so much that they were afraid to join the meetings held by the movement. Support waned until the Hucks stopped activities in 1954, and their leader surrendered. Bunyip, a nocturnal creature or water spirit from Aboriginal Australian mythology, which dwells in caves, lakes, rivers, and swamps. Bunyip is translated by Aboriginal Australians today as devil or evil spirit. It's said that the bunyip is primarily carnivorous, preying upon human women and children, though some are described as herbivores. However, these are the only characteristics that most can agree on. Because of this, physical descriptions and artistic depictions of the bunyip vary massively. 60% of all sightings resemble seals or bears, and 20% of sightings are of long-necked creatures with small heads. The remaining descriptions are utterly horrifying. Mermaid, usually depicted as having the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a fish. Christopher Columbus wrote of an alleged encounter with a mermaid. Columbus reported seeing 3, quote, female forms which rose high out of the water, but were not as beautiful as they were represented. Also, the logbook of Blackbeard records that he instructed his crew on several voyages to steer away from charted waters, which he called enchanted, for fear of merfolk or mermaids. Ahul, a giant bat or flying primate, said to live in the deepest parts of the jungles of Java and can be found across most of Indonesia. The creature is described as having an ape-like face, large eyes, red-skinned leathery wings, oversized claws on its forearms, and a coat of thick gray fur. It's said to have a wingspan of 12 feet, which is twice the size of the largest known bat, which is a flying fox. The Ahul was first reported by Dr. Ernest Bartels in 1925. The doctor was exploring a waterfall on the slopes of the Salak Mountains when a giant, unknown bat, the Ahul, flew directly overhead. In a later expedition in 1927, around 11:30, the doctor encountered the Ahul again. He was laying in bed inside of his thatched house, close to a river in western Java, listening to the sounds of the jungle, when suddenly he heard a very different sound coming from directly overhead. This cry is what gave the creature its namesake, air rods, also known as solar entities or skyfish. These mysterious objects appear in skies all over the planet. Skyfish are thought to swim in the air like fish swim through water at incredible speeds. Skyfish are picked up by cameras and cell phones all over the world. However, these artifacts appear naturally in video and outdoor photography as a result of an optical illusion due to motion blur, after-image trails of flying insects and their wing beats. Here, you can see the phenomenon reproduced by a long exposure image of moths flying around a light. Despite this, there are some paranormal researchers who believe that there is more to this phenomena, that these skyfish are more than elongated insects. Some witnesses claim to have seen skyfish with their own eyes, some up to several feet long. Air rods are connected to other stories of atmospheric beasts or sky jellyfish. Alaskan Ice Monster. 2 employees of the Alaskan Bureau of Land Management captured this video of an alleged cryptid swimming in the Chena River in Fairbanks, Alaska. The creature looks to be 12 to 15 feet long Experts from the Alaska Management of Fish and Game claim that the creature was nothing biological, just junk. Specifically, the Bureau stated the thing was, quote, fragile ice stuck to a rope that is probably caught on a bridge pier. The natural phenomenon of fragile ice occurs during bursts of cold. Instead of forming a crust, the small and supercooled disks mix into flowing rivers and streams, giving the water a slushy appearance. When the Alaskan agency employees returned to the scene, the area had warmed, and the thing vanished, along with the river ice and snow. Phantom cats. This refers to sightings of big cats far outside their home range. Phantom cats are most widely reported in the United Kingdom. Some of the sightings are believed to have been the result of big cat owners releasing their animals in the wild after the introduction of the Dangerous Wild Animals Act in 1976. This act covers many species, such as primates, carnivores, larger or venomous reptiles, dangerous spiders, and scorpions. Big cats, as well as hybrids between wild and domestic species, such as Bengal cats or wolf dogs. However, given that these sightings are persisting, it's unlikely that this could explain all of them. One of the latest sightings was reported by a 59-year-old office worker. Quote, I was in the living room and saw something blurry outside through the living room door. I grabbed my phone and took a picture. I guess it remains a mystery. I enjoyed the speculation about it all. You can see the photo that she captured on screen now. This cat appears to be an exotic species such as puma, lynx, or leopard. Her sighting is one of 200 reported in the Cornwall region over the last 13 years. However, sightings have also taken place in Canada, Australia, Germany, France, Spain, Switzerland, Ireland, New Zealand, Finland, Denmark, Hawaii, Italy, Luxembourg, and the United States. Tsushinoko is a legendary Japanese snake. Its most distinguishing characteristic is its wide midsection and small rat-like tail. The Japanese word for Tsushinoko means child of hammer or child of dirt. The dirt child name may come from its appearance, which is sometimes described as entirely black, including the eyes. Other Tsushinoko are described as brown, blending in with a forest floor covered in leaves. Its most noted ability is that it can grasp its tail in its jaws and roll after its prey, creating a wheel, which is also inadvertently creating the Ouroboros symbol. The Tsushinoko is also said to have a remarkable jumping ability, able to leap 3 feet. Tsushinoko sightings date back 1,400 years, even referenced in the Kojiki, the oldest book about the history of Japan. These creatures are said to be found in remote locations like mountains and forests, specifically those near Shikoku, Honshu, the Kyushu Islands, and on the Korean Peninsula. The government of Yoshi Okayama once offered a 20 million yen reward for the successful capture of a Tsushinoko. In June 1994, a man named Kazuaki Noda and his wife reported having come across a huge snake with a thick body like a beer bottle and a head being described as like that of a tortoise. On May 8, 2000, a farmer named Sugi Tanaka reported having come across 2 metallic-colored snakes with tails like rats. In the same year, in June, a woman reported a Tsushinoko swimming along a river. She describes her experience as follows. I was surprised. I just pointed at it and asked, "Who are you? Who are you?" It didn't answer me, but just stared. It had a round face and didn't take its eyes off me. I can still see the eyes now. They were big and round and looked like they were floating on the water. I've lived over 80 years, but I'd never seen anything like that in my life. Mokili Mbembe. This creature falls into a category of cryptid known as a neo-dinosaur, modern living dinosaurs. Mokili Mbembe originates from Central Africa. The creature's name is Lingala for, quote, one who stops the flow of rivers. It supposedly lives in the Congo River Basin, sometimes described as a living creature, sometimes as a spirit. There have been many expeditions into the Congo with the goal of finding Mokili Mbembe.
though none have been successful at proving its existence. In many cases, accounts of the creature were actually propagated by locals who wanted Westerners to come and invest. Some of the expeditions searching for the creature had set out with an unscientific bias in mind. The most reasonable and agreed upon explanation is that the creature is a legend based on the black rhinoceros, a species once common to Central Africa, where the stories of the creature originated. One interesting theory is that, if you believe in ghosts, that these neo-dinosaur type cryptids could be the spirits of dinosaurs. Pennsylvanian white Bigfoot. Though most Sasquatch sightings take place in the northwestern United States, there are sightings of similar bipedal apes in many places across the globe. This creature was first sighted in Blakesley, Pennsylvania, 1970. According to eyewitness Annette B., she saw a creature which stood between 6 and 7 feet tall, with a broad chest, a long neck, and a coat of dirtied white fur. Annette went on to describe its face as, quote, "Its eyes were dark and spaced far apart. Its hair covered the lower half of its face. There was pinkish skin around the eyes and the forehead. It looked like its hair was a little longer on its head and hanging over its forehead like bangs." 3 years later, September 27, 1973, two girls were walking outside in Beaver County, Pennsylvania at 9:30 p.m. when an 8-foot-tall being covered with white fur and red glowing eyes ran into the nearby woods. The humanoid was carrying a large glowing orb in its hands. The girls ran off hysterically into their house. The father of one of the girls then went into the woods in search of the creature and stayed there for over an hour. The same year, a glowing orb lands near Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and two Bigfoot-type creatures are observed in the pasture at the same time. A woman fired her shotgun at one of the creatures only a few feet away, and it disappeared out of sight. At the same time, a luminous object hovered over the nearby woods. In July of 2008, a local news station in Pennsylvania ran a story which talked about the, quote, "white, possibly albino creature," after receiving an anonymous email. It was said to be some sort of animal about 6 to 7 feet tall, covered in all white fur. The email specifically mentioned a wooded area in Carbondale near a mine reclamation site. Mine reclamation is the process of restoring land that has been mined to an economically usable condition. 2 years later, in 2010, people began to report sightings of a white juvenile Bigfoot in Carbondale, Pennsylvania. People in the area began to hear strange noises and disturbances coming from the woods. One man heard strange noises coming from the forest next to his home for 2 weeks before summoning the courage to investigate. Carrying a flashlight and a camera, he ventured forth and was able to capture some bizarre video footage which can be seen on screen now. For 1 full second, a creature was caught on camera. If this is a hoax, this is definitely a good costume. YouTuber Bigfoot Tony enhanced the footage so that you can glean more from the darkness. Assuming that this is real, the most popular explanation is that what people are seeing is an elderly Sasquatch whose hair has gone gray with age. My favorite aspect of cryptid or alien encounters is the element of high strangeness. We've talked about high strangeness before. In case you don't remember, this is when multiple unexplained or paranormal events coincide with one another, and the 1973 encounter is definitely bizarre. What was the orb the creature was carrying? Why was a UFO seen just after the creature vanished? This encounter is used by some as fuel for the theory that Sasquatch could be much more than an undiscovered great ape. Homunculus, meaning little man, is said to be a humanoid creature that is a fully formed microscopic human adult that is formed when a sperm is injected into a chicken's egg. The homunculus was popularized in 16th century alchemy as an alchemical ritual coined by Paracelsus
alchemist, and the father of toxicology. To manufacture a homunculus, Paracelsus stated that the needed spagyric, which is a term probably coined by Paracelsus, implying an alchemical process using semen. Substances should be sealed in a glass vial and placed in horse dung to digest for 40 days. At the end of this time, something will begin to live and move in the bottle. This is sometimes a man, said Paracelsus, but a man who has no body and is transparent. Known as the wickedest man in the world, Aleister Crowley wrote a novel that deals with the production of a kind of homunculus he called a moonchild. Crowley wrote of a magic rite to induce a particular type of spirit to incarnate in an embryo, which a woman would then carry until birth. More recently, many people were exposed to the concept of the homunculus by a bizarre Russian video that went viral. A Russian man named Korny created several videos, the first of which has over 21 million views, detailing his alleged experiments into creating the homunculus. The creature he sired at one point spits a mysterious liquid at him, and Korny smashes the homunculus with a book. Though these videos are very bizarre, they have been proven to be hoaxes. Bear Lake Monster. Bear Lake, on the Utah-Idaho border, may be home to another sea monster. One team of folklorists stated that, quote, it is reported to resemble a serpent, both legs about 18 inches long, on which it marauds along the shoreline. One article reported that the creature had a, quote, large undulating body with about 30 feet of exposed surface of a light cream color, moving swiftly through the water at a distance of 3 miles from the point of observation. Others have reported seeing a monster-like creature which went faster than a locomotive and had a head variously described as being similar to that of a cow, otter, crocodile, or a walrus, minus the tusks. Its size was reported to be at least 50 feet long and not less than 40. Some sightings even spoke of a second member of the species and smaller creatures as well. The origin of the Bear Lake Monster goes back to a series of articles written by Joseph C. Rich, a Mormon colonizer at Bear Lake. He wrote several articles detailing the accounts of locals who had seen the creature, though he had not seen it himself. This story was written in 1868 by Joseph C. Rich and was sent to the local newspaper. It goes as follows, quote, the Indians have a tradition concerning a strange, serpent-like creature inhabiting the waters of Bear Lake, which they say carried off some of their braves many moons ago. Since then, they will not sleep close to the lake, neither will they swim in it, nor let their squaws and papooses bathe in it. However, 26 years later, Joseph C. Rich finally admitted that the story was a, quote, wonderful first-class lie. The Beast of Bray Road. In Elkhorn, Wisconsin, there exists a country road named Bray Road, which is where the creature was first seen. The Beast of Bray Road is probably the most well-known werewolf or dogman type creature, though there are many dogman encounters in other locations. Sightings of this creature were reported to the local animal control and the police, and the law enforcement officials kept a file on the Beast of Bray Road. In 1989, Indreezy, the manager of a local lounge, was driving during the night when she came across a strange figure on the side of the road. Its arms were bent, gripping roadkill with long, sharp claws. It was the size of a man and had brownish-gray fur with the face of a wolf. The creature simply stared at her as she passed, its eyes reflecting her headlights. Journalist Linda Godfrey, who was the first to cover the Beast of Bray Road case, sketched Indreezy's encounter. Indreezy described the creature as, quote, satanic, and stated that when she returned home, books began flying off the shelves. When she reported her story to law enforcement, an officer visited her and stated that something, quote, unusual happened, but never said what. In 1992, a teenager named Tom Richta reported that he saw the creature twice while driving to a campground near Bray Road on Highway 6. While he was driving, he hit something which he thought was a mailbox, though he was unsure because it was a foggy night. Richter began to reverse his car when a, quote, long, odd-shaped arm reached in towards him through his open window. He said its belly was on top of the car, so he never saw its face, but he did see large claws and fur. The same night, a truck driver in the area wrecked his semi when a similar creature crossed the road. Again, assuming that this is real, the Beast of Bray Road could be one of the many dogmen-type cryptids which are reported all around America and the world. Even the ancient Greeks recorded in their histories a race of people they called the Cyanocephali, meaning men with the head of dogs, who are said to have their own civilization and society just as we do. And with that, we're finally done with level 1 of the cryptid iceberg. This level had a lot of the more well-known creatures as well as sightings, so I don't know if I'll make the remaining levels as long as part 1. But if you enjoyed and you like the long-form content, please let me know. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And again, I'd just like to thank you for watching. It means a lot.